consciousness is like kind of the keystone, I'd say, to my research. Like looking at various ways of trying to understand consciousness over the years, it's led to UFOs, ancient history, mysticism, theology. I was lucky enough to actually be one of the very first people to go down into these archaeological digs happening in Saxe-Roman, and we see underneath the ground precision carved blocks. UFO videos that get released by the government are incredibly low resolution black and white imagery. When it's a Russian plane, got 4K full color imagery, there's always a level of ambiguity with the releases. It's never definitive. I was just asking for peaceful contact, something to reciprocate and say hello. You're essentially reaching out on all bandwidths and hoping that whatever swims up is friendly. As I was looking around, I saw this dark cloud, but there was like a shimmer to it, almost like TV static. This cloud just sucked into itself, and as it did that, it revealed what was actually inside the cloud, which was
Maybe we even start there. Like, what was the experience like going on Joe Rogan's podcast last month?
Well, I mean, it was like a dream come true for me, dude. Like, obviously, like that's such an important thing for any podcaster to get onto something like Joe Rogan. And I was actually at my family's like during Christmas when I got the invite. So I was like around the dinner table. I was like, I just got invited on Joe. They're like, oh my God, it's amazing.
That's awesome.
And I mean, like, going out there and meeting him, and he's very easy to talk to, very nice guy. And I was saying to Brian, actually, like the highlight for me, I mean, obviously going on the Joe Rogan show was so cool. The highlight was going to the mothership and checking out the comedy club afterwards and hanging out with Kurt Metzger and Kill Tony and all these guys and watching them do their comedy sets. And yeah, it's just like overall like a really unique kind of pinch me experience. And yeah, I had a great time. And Joe seemed to be pretty happy with it. He seemed to enjoy the conversation. So
he was pumped, man. He was like, he was all into it. He was going off on the structures underneath the pyramid.
Yeah, I mean, it's all his wheelhouse. He loves this kind of stuff.
Totally.
We all love this kind of stuff.
Totally. Yeah. So that's awesome, man. So did the invite come via email, or how did the invite come?
He DM'd me because he's been following me on X for like about a year and a half before that. So I was like, trying not to message him too much and like, like, hey Joe.
Yeah.
But then he just dropped me a message. Was like, do you want to come on the pod? I was like, when we're going to say no?
Right, yeah. No, I'm good,
right.
Joe. I've got
some things going on, a little bit busy.
Yeah, next couple of years.
It was a pleasure and a unique experience and a bit of a, kind of strange moment in the space because you just forget what you're saying. I had to look back on it and look at what I was saying, and I was like, oh, man, I ran my mouth a bit on the ufology side of things, which I wanted to do because there is a lot of things in that subject that I've experienced personally that I wanted to highlight, which would be controversial, and I knew that was going to be controversial, but I'm glad I did it,
Yeah, well, I mean, we got Donald Trump now tweeting about it, right?
It's very interesting, right? That, this is, I mean, do you think that he could be the disclosure president? Because one of the things that I think, and one of the things actually we're talking about in the car on the way here, is that a lot of this could be to get in front of the Epstein file controversy, right? So like, okay, there's all of this happening right now. The elite networks are being implicated in some of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Quick, let's roll out the flying saucers and, make them happy on that. And I think that one of the problems we have in this modern age is people are so distrusting of institutions that even if they tried some form of legitimate UFO disclosure, most people won't believe it, especially in my generation, the generations below. They're so distrustful of institutional information. So it's an interesting moment. I wonder, because he's mentioned it a couple of times throughout the presidency, and I would like to see something real happen from this, but I'm holding my breath because I'm not holding my breath even because this has become a bit of a cyclical pattern with like big promises of, disclosure and congressional hearings in the Senate. And I've been very closely paying attention to that for years. And it'd be nice to see some actionable intelligence actually getting dropped for a change.
For sure,
yeah.
For sure. Have you seen Chris Rock, Bigger and Blacker?
No.
Okay. It's the original comedy skit by Chris Rock. It's phenomenal. It's like it's probably my favorite comedy skit of all time. I think it is. It's about an hour, and in that it's back when Bill Clinton was president, and he's like, he's kind of saying like he's mimicking Bill, and he's kind of like, oh, kids got shot? Good. They ain't talking about me.
Right.
Building blows up? Good. Nobody's talking about me. And I feel like that's kind of the, we can't talk about, as long as we're talking about UFOs, we're not talking about Epstein. We're not talking about...
Dude, one of my favorite things is Joe Rogan's, imitation of Bill Clinton. He was like, I only flew on the plane 27 times.
Perfect.
I only went on the Leader Express 27 times. But yeah, exactly. Right. They're trying to get in front of some major controversies. And what better way to do it as a distraction than to say, hey, aliens are real and UFOs exist and we should talk about that. So, obviously, like as someone who's a researcher in that field, I think there's a lot of legitimacy to understanding and unpacking the UFO subject. But trusting the government, especially in such a sensitive geopolitical time, with handling that kind of information in an objective, transparent way, off of the back of such a huge controversy like the Epstein files, makes me suspicious. Yeah. Definitely makes me suspicious. And also like that weird piece of theater with Obama on that podcast recently where he said that aliens are real, and then the guy didn't even ask any follow-up questions on that, and everyone's on the internet going, why did this guy not say anything? You had a former president of the United States literally say point blank, yes, aliens are real, but then going on a little diatribe. Why didn't you cut him off and say, excuse me, sir, like, what do you mean aliens are real?
How do you know?
So I just feel like that was theater. It felt like theater to me, because no journalist worth their salt would not back up that with a follow-on question. Do you know what I mean? So there's a lot of theater around ufology right now, that's for sure.
Yeah, I've never really talked about politicians, but we're talking about aliens right now. So I guess I guess I feel like if Donald Trump was going to be the disclosure president and he really cared about the truth and getting the truth out there about this topic, then he would have started this in his first term on his first year. It's not something you start on your second term when you're 2.5 years in or whatever we are.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like, again, he's mentioned it. There's been moments in interviews over the years, even during his first presidency, where he's like, I've heard stories from Navy pilots. I don't really believe it, but it's interesting. So, he's made comments, but yeah, he's not run on this. He's in no way put this as a kind of like primary objective of the government of the Trump administration. So it does feel like it's just opportunistic. And so, I mean, at the end of the day, like if it's opportunistic and actionable intel comes from that,
that'd be great.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah, who cares?
And in some weird way, we might almost have to thank Jeffrey Epstein for that because of the fact that he might have caused the controversial necessity for something else to distract from him, whether that's true or not. But it's just an interesting turn of events that you've got such a huge kind of like viral storm over the Epstein files, then the UFO thing coming in, and it's been in the pipeline now for since 2017, essentially, when the New York Times first came out on the UFO subject with Lou Elizondo. So it's been close to a decade. It's been a long time. People have been waiting for some sort of real disclosure, and that's kind of why I started losing faith and interest in the guys that are running kind of like the mainstream government-led element of the disclosure, because people need to remember that this has actually been going on now since 2017. That's a long time ago, and we haven't seen a huge amount of movement in terms of major revelations. We've just had a lot of stories and whistleblowers coming out claiming first or second-hand experiences, but no actual evidence, no actual proper data. And I think that's the concern for a lot of people, myself included, was just like, where's this really going other than just having this conversation in Congress and the Senate that doesn't seem to be yielding anything legitimate. So maybe this is going to be, a step forward in the right direction. We'll just have to wait and see.
So in terms of you and your research and your focus currently, like there's ancient civilization component of it. There's a UAP component of it. I mean, there's more than that, obviously.
Consciousness is like kind of the keystone, I would say, to my research. And then from like looking at various ways of trying to understand consciousness over the years, it's led to UFOs, ancient history, mysticism, theology, like various areas of research that when you put them together in like a holistic package kind of start to create a bit of a mosaic, a bit of an understanding of human history and trajectory and our ability to understand and perceive reality. And I think UFOs tie into that very much in terms of how we perceive reality, what these things truly are. And then ancient antiquated history and mysticism and the incredible things that seem to be happening in prehistoric times with engineering multi-ton structures, acoustically designing them to resonate in ways that excite the human brain. These are very strange biophysical and scientific signatures that shouldn't really exist in these time periods that also, in my opinion, correlate to consciousness, changing our perception. So it all fits in and it all connects in very strange ways, but I'm like not a historian, not an archaeologist, not a UFO researcher. Like I'm just a person who's interested in a lot of different ways of observing reality. And through my research, I've connected a few different avenues together. And, these things are represented in, the main subjects I cover. But by no means do I kind of consider myself an expert on any particular subject, just more of a general knowledge and holistic puzzle piece connector in a way.
You're kind of exploring what's real. right? I
Yeah,
mean,
like
you're trying
really,
to
yeah.
get to the bottom of like reality, it
Yeah.
sounds like. I mean, with the UAP phenomenon, I mean, that's happening. There's something happening out there. So what is it? What's going on with the ancient history phenomenon? You know, there's something clearly happening there. There's too many
Yeah.
just weird anomalies. And, you know, so it's like, okay, what's really the truth about that? Consciousness is obviously at the core of reality.
Yeah.
So, you know, we should probably try to figure that out. So you're exploring the nature of reality, basically.
Yeah, and I guess like for me, it's always just been that type of an exploration, regardless of being a researcher. I've just been a very curious person, and I've always found it a bit strange that not a lot of people stop and go like, what is going on? Like just in life, what is reality? What is existence? What is this tiny planet? You zoom out, you think about the incomprehensible scale of what's going on beyond us, and I think a lot of people maybe find that intimidating and disturbing to think about too much. Whereas for me, that's where my brain is most of the time, and I have to find ways to anchor myself into normal reality and just kind of go about my day to day because I'm always thinking about, bigger picture issues that aren't necessarily healthy for you as a human being. You look at the quotes all the way through antiquity of searching for knowledge is just a way to find madness and misery, because the more you learn, the more you realize how little you actually know about your own reality, about your own self. And so it's like a strange exploration, I guess, for anyone who's trying to go too deep into, their own perception of reality and how they correspond to this reality. Because once you start digging in, you realize we don't know anything truly. We have such a surface level, myopic understanding of reality as human beings, and we project this arrogance of understanding onto the universe, which is being continuously contradicted. And that's happening more and more, I would say, in this modern era. You look at the various revelations in ancient history and, Göbekli Tepe, the Khafre pyramid scans, things underneath Sacsayhuaman, all these ancient mythologies being in some way validated that there are, these huge infrastructural projects below ground that would not have been possible for these people to create. So there's so many question marks, whether it's in consciousness and mysticism and ufology or ancient history. And I just like collecting question marks and trying to figure them out. Like, what exactly does all of this mean? So it's been an intuitive journey, like not deliberate in any sort of real sense. I just come across information. I'm guided by where I want to go with my research, and it's led me to, a few particular topics of interest that I think are very important.
Awesome. Awesome. So, I mean, in terms of consciousness, like it's such a broad topic and different people have different thoughts on what consciousness is. And, like in terms of studying consciousness for you, where do you begin with that?
Well, again, it was very intuitive, and it was more based on my own life experiences because, and I've told this story a number of times because it's basically the reason why I started Project Unity in the first place. I was coming out of university, and I was in a pretty bad state. Like I was in a depression. There was just a lot of things going on in my life, personal friendships and stresses and worries, and it was not a good time for me. And it was at that time when my dad was a bit worried about me, and he sent me a message saying, "Look, I'm out in France right now, and I think you should come and stay with me. I'm in the countryside. It'd be good for you just to kind of, unplug from your reality for a minute." So I was like, all right. And I went over to France and stayed with him in this house. And it was at that point that he said, "I've been reading these books and I've got them on audiobook, and I think you should listen to them. I think they'd be really helpful for you." And because I was in a bit of a depressive rut, I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. Like, maybe they'll do something, probably not, but okay, Dad, like I'll listen. And it's a audiobook series from a book series called Conversations with God by a guy called Neil Donald Walsh. Have you heard of these books before?
It sounds vaguely familiar,
He's
but I
quite well
haven't read
known. I've had him on now for a couple of interviews, which is a real blessing for me just because he was so integral in starting my journey into researching and understanding my own reality in a better way. And I've never been one to say like, oh, this book will change you. Like, this is the book. Because I don't think that that's how it works with trying to generalize getting people to wake up. It's not one solution for everyone. But this is what I needed at that time, apparently. And Neil Donald Walsh is a very interesting guy. He's an older man now. He went through a tough time. He was a radio host. He then got let go of his job because they were downsizing. He got hit by a car, broke his neck, became homeless, and was like homeless for 2 years, managed to get back on his feet. And it was during this time period of desperation that he was writing on like a yellow legal pad his frustrations, and he wrote an angry letter to God. And apparently at 3 a.m, he woke up with this absolute desire to get on that yellow legal pad, and he started writing out questions and was receiving answers instantaneously. And they were answers that even to him were contradicting his current belief set. And that's very interesting to me. If you think about confirmation bias, and maybe it was just his own psychology talking to him, it was challenging him in some pretty fundamental ways. So he considers this a conversation with God. And he created these 3 books, which became a dialogue of, his conversations. Now, whether or not he was talking to God, I don't know. But what was written in those books was incredibly powerful for me. Very simple ways of understanding very complex issues and personal issues. And so that was the initial catalyst that made me go, well, I need to understand God, spirituality, consciousness, life after death. I want to know more. So it became, a general research effort of reading various books from different people, whether it's Carl Jung or, from the scientific perspective, the psychological perspective, mysticism and theology, various different ancient traditions, and just kind of getting a better picture for what people were understanding and seeing as the spiritual reality through their perspectives, and seeing what matched up with what I was reading about in these books and getting to terms with. But I had a very fundamental shift and series of experiences in 2019 that actually were the primary reason for me starting my YouTube channel, the primary reason for calling it Project Unity, which for me is about a unification or a symbiosis between spirit and science. I think these are just 2 ways of observing reality. They're made of the same stuff. It's just a different perspective of overlaying our perception onto it. So spirit and science are just interchangeable concepts to me in many ways. And I think the more we get into the quantum realm of reality with our latest innovations in computation, we're going to start to realize, and we already are, physicists are already struggling to kind of articulate how reality is just pure energy, pure data, pure information, because you can just say pure consciousness. You couldn't just say the universal consciousness. I find what's very interesting with science, and especially when you're getting into the stuff that seems to have correlations to ancient spiritual practice, is they're saying the exact same thing, just in more articulate verbiage.
Sure.
Quantum dynamic systems communicating across non-local time. It's like, okay, but what you're really saying is we're all one, we're all connected. So the same thing that the Sufis and the mystics were saying for thousands of years, but now we're getting to the point of empirically realizing it. Right. So anyway, I'm going off on a bit of a diatribe there. But my experiences and the reason why they were so transformative was that I'd kind of got myself into another depression, in a sense, because at this point, I felt like I'd been reading and learning and researching and trying to find out, and I was collecting all of this different, ideas and understandings of big picture reality. But none of it was actually helping me. None of it was making me happier. None of it was benefiting my life. So I kind of got into a bit of a rut, and I was sitting on my bed one night, and I guess you could call it a prayer, but I was just talking out to the universe, and I just said, look, I need something that confirms all of this. If this is real, if all of these, high ideas about universal consciousness and what I am as a spiritual being, if all of this is real, I want some real confirmation of that. I'm ready for it. I need it. Like, give it to me. And so a week later, my best friend, he says, oh, yeah, I was watching this documentary. You got to check it out. I was like, okay, what's it called? He says, it's called Unacknowledged, by this guy called Dr. Stephen Greer. And at this point, was not a ufologist, didn't know who Dr. Greer was, none of that. So I was like, cool. We watched the documentary. It's a really good introduction to the UFO subject. Lots of, missile Minutemen officers and spooks and spies talking about their experiences. So it definitely is a good one to bring people up to speed with, what's happening in the UFO world. But at the end of that documentary is when Greer brings up this concept of CE5, this idea that you can actually initiate communication and contact with these other beings through the medium of consciousness, through getting into certain states, projecting these certain states, and requesting for a peaceful contact. If I'd watched that documentary without sitting on my bed a week prior, I probably just would have glazed right over it. But for me, because I had been asking the universe, give me something real, something actionable, something I can do that proves that this is real. And then a week later, there's a guy going, you can get into states of consciousness and actually have experiences. And there you go. That's the proof that it's real, right? If it works. So I just started going out into my back garden every night. It was during the summer, like around August 2019. So it was relatively warm in the UK. And I was just going out, I'm not a meditative practitioner or an expert at all, which is actually what emboldened me when I had these experiences to go out, put myself on a camera and say, hey, I'm a normal guy. And this happened to me. So I'm pretty sure this can happen to you, and we should probably talk about this. So I was going out into my back garden, literally just in through the nose, out through the mouth, just calming my breathing, and then just started to raise my positive emotions, being grateful for life, being, just gratitude for being a human being, for existing, and then very clearly would formulate thoughts about, I want to see something that is ready and is willing to, meet me on this level. If you're wanting to reach out, and obviously I'm probably messing it up a little bit now because it's just all internal monologue that I was chanting out to the universe. But in a nutshell, I was just asking for peaceful contact, something to reciprocate and say hello. And I started to get, not very long after making these requests, I don't think anything happened on the first night, but I did go out every night and was just looking up at the stars and getting into this state and sending out these thoughts. And I've been someone who looks at the stars all their life. I love it. I'd lie in the field with my dad and we'd look at stars and satellites. So I know what satellites look like, and I've seen iridium flares when a satellite catches the light and it flashes and things like that. But what I was starting to see from the beginning was a very large influx of flashes of white light. And you'd literally be thinking and sending out these thoughts, and then there'd be a bright white flash in a void of space, totally crystal clear night sky. And you'd look up at that void of space, no star, and maybe you start, sending another thought, another flash. Okay, it feels like it's corresponding to me, and send another flash. And then there'd be other ones in the night sky that would happen. And then you'd see a large influx of what looked like satellites, absolutely do look like satellites, but at a volume I'd never experienced. Like, we're talking, oh, there's one, there's another, oh my God, there's another. There's like 10, 15 in the space of 4 minutes, which is just not normal, traversing from all directions of space. And it just felt like, to me, especially because this ramped up and became even more obvious experiences, it felt like a baby steps learning program. Like, we're not trying to scare you. Whatever this is, it's like it's not trying to intimidate you. It's just giving you enough to go, okay, that something seemed to happen there. It's not like the sky ripped open and God came down. And it was just like a gentle nudge of, that's not normal, right? It's like, okay, I'm going to keep going out and looking. So in August 2019, I was at this point probably a few weeks or a month into continuously going out, seeing these flashes, seeing these satellite-style orbs traversing in large numbers, and then this night doing the same thing, looking up, and I saw it's such an incredible, strange experience for me that I have to continuously remind myself sometimes, like, you saw that, right? Like, you got to remember you actually saw that, because it's a number of years ago. I was at the back of my garden looking towards my house, and I was just panning around the sky, and basically what happened first is I saw a flash of light, like I was kind of getting used to seeing at this point. Saw this flash of light in the sky, and I was looking up at it, and it was going flash, 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 like this, completely static. And then it was slightly lower down. Each time it would flash, it would be slightly lower down. So it was moving through space. And I was just watching this thing like, what are you, man? What are you? And then it stopped just above two stars, kind of forming the apex of a pyramid or a triangle, and was just flashing. And it stayed there for about 4 minutes. I was just watching. Yeah, I was just watching this thing like, and people ask like, why aren't you filming this? And in all honesty, I wasn't actually in the space of like, oh, I've got to get video for the world at this point. And I understand, like, you can be as skeptical as you want. That's fine. I do understand that. But I was doing it for me. I was just doing this for me, my own spiritual journey, and things were happening, and I was just observing them. I wasn't like, oh, let me just quickly get my phone out. Right. It just wasn't that type of mindset. And I think for anyone who's legitimately experienced things that are very intense like that, it's very difficult to break away from the moment and go, oh, it's time to start filming for everybody else in the world. Like, that's not what it was. It was a selfish moment for me that I then share publicly, and people either believe or don't, which is fine. But I was, looking at this flash, to the point where it was happening for so long. I was like, all right, well, thank you for being here, but I'm going to keep looking around. And I panned across the sky, and I saw, as I was looking around, I saw this dark cloud. Now, it was a completely crystal clear night sky, so there was just one dark cloud, but it was kind of a double take situation. I was looking, saw this cloud, looked over here, then I looked back at this cloud. And when I looked back, that's when I clocked that this was not normal. It's very difficult to describe. The only way I've described it is that it was a relatively large dark cloud, but there was like a shimmer to it, almost like TV static. It was like something was shimmering, agitated, energetic. I don't know how to describe it, but nothing I'd ever seen in a cloud, like a very light overlay of static, fizzing, popping kind of motion. And this cloud was like, if my house is here and I'm at the back of my garden looking towards my house, this cloud is coming in this trajectory. So it's going to go past my house and it's going to keep going on in that direction. And I'm back here.
And how far away was it?
Oh, I mean, it's hard to gauge, but it was like, relatively high up in the sky, lower atmosphere, but it wasn't like high up in the atmosphere, but it was, it is difficult to gauge. I'd be roughly saying like, like a mile up or something like that. I don't know. But it was moving in a natural cloud floating trajectory, and it was going this way. So I was watching it, and it was surely going to go past my house and just carry on. But it had this very strange staticky looking effect. So I was staring at it, just looking at this thing like, what is that? It gets to exactly where my house is, where I'm at the back of my path, and it does a complete 90-degree turn. I mean, like a jarring this way suddenly. towards me.
Towards you.
Towards me. So it was going this way. Now it's going this way, and it's going to be eventually directly above my head. And so at that point, when I saw it do, because it was jagged, it literally went like that, like a weird jagged turn, and that made my heart skip a beat. I wasn't necessarily terrified, but I was kind of rooted in place, like a bit in awe. So I was just staring, and I was watching this thing coming up over towards me, and it got directly above me, Matt. And I swear to God, this is the truth. On my mother's life, this is the truth. This cloud just sucked into itself, like went, and as it did that, it revealed what was actually inside the cloud, which was a triangular formation of, I want to say, maybe 20, 25 orange circles of light in this triangle. And this happened literally, like the cloud melted. It happened directly above my head, and it didn't stop. It carried on. So I had to turn around and watch as this triangle just moved off in the sky. And I don't think it was a vehicle or a craft for a couple of reasons. But the first reason at that moment of observation was that some of those orange lights were actually swapping formation. They were swapping where they were in that triangle. So I don't think it was a vehicle. It was like a squadron of orbs for whatever reason. It was about 10:30 at night. I remember I phoned my mom. She was the first person I phoned my mom. She was having dinner with my stepdad, and I was just like, I've seen it. It sounded completely insane, obviously. Like, Mom, I've just seen this triangle of orbs. She didn't know how to deal with that at the time. And I mean, my family all believe me now, obviously, but at that moment, it was like, what's happened to him? What's going on? But I woke up the next day, and this was always a bit of a weird one for me. And I brought this up on Joe Rogan, and this could be a psychological thing for me, like that I've purposely avoided not digging too deep into this because I'm like, yeah, just ignore that. But I came out of the shower the next day and I was drying myself off, and immediately, like the moment I looked at my arm, so I've got a tattoo here
dots.
now. I had these 3 dots on my
I saw
arm.
that.
Yeah, and now obviously they did fade, but they faded after about a year. Like they were on my arm. Now I'm a bit of an idiot sometimes. I just don't think to do things, so I didn't go to a dermatologist. I kind of wish I had, just so I knew if they were like, not quite sure how to explain this. What exactly is this on your skin? Because there was no bite, it was no scab and itching, no discomfort at all. All 3 of these dots just had like a sheen on them, like a slight shine, which is indicative of like a healed burn or something, like cauterized skin. And yeah, they stayed on my arm for about a year, and then they faded out. And I just never got any satisfactory answer from that. Just always in the back of my head was a bit like, did I give permission to be, did they take me? Was I taken? Like, you know, if I had regression therapy, would I find out that this was actually a really disturbing event that happened to me? So I think there's like a little bit in my head of like denial of like, I don't really want to know what that was about. But I did reach out through peaceful intentions, grounding myself in a state of energetic consciousness where you can feel your emotion, you can feel your energy. And I don't know really how it works, but there were certainly moments where I was in my back garden and I felt like I just slipped into an almost trance state with my thoughts. I was barely thinking, just saying like, if you want to come and be with me, come with me, just over and over again, over and over. And it was at those moments where I almost felt like I'd fallen out of my conscious mode and gone into a very repetitive, almost trance-like mode. That's when you'd get flashes of light. That's when things would happen. And so I think that we're dealing with a very delicate membrane of perception. It's extremely delicate. And so it's very hard to prove it. It's right on the edge of our ability to observe reality. And I think if you get yourself into a state of consciousness that is comparable or acceptable to that, you will get a glimpse. But absent that, you do not get that glimpse. And if you do, if you have like, you know, UFO abductions and things like that, I think that's an entirely different story. I think that's something else going on. But what I felt truly was that was some form of spiritual interaction and communication and contact rooted in deep consciousness. And so that's when I started my YouTube channel. When I had these experiences, I actually had 3 other experiences with those orange orbs, including, because the other 2 occasions they flew by in formations, like a V formation with a couple trailing off at the back and a kind of loose W with a couple trailing off at the back on 2 separate evenings. They just came across the sky. That was it, like nothing else. They just flew across the sky. But the 3rd out of the 4, because it was like the 2nd one was a V formation, the 4th one was a W formation, but the 3rd one, 3 orbs came flying across the sky, stopped on a dime above my house, high up, and then they started to descend. And these orbs were coming down, 3 of them, and they were moving around each other in this very strange way, very hypnotic, kind of like encircling each other, and they were descending. And I kid you not, man, these things froze about 2 feet above the roof of my house. and they were like roughly basketball sized, slightly transparent, pastel orange color circles of light. Not even spheres. That was weird to me, like thinking back on it after, like, having the experience. They weren't spherical. It was like the closest thing that I've applied it to as a cameraman is an effect called bokeh. I don't know if you've heard of that. Bokeh. You'll know it. It's the effect where they do it on like highways and stuff, where you outfocus the camera and all of the lights just become circles moving across the screen. It's very famous, used in lots of different films. It's called bokeh. And that is what they looked like. They were just orange circles, like not spherical so much. Yeah, like kind of like that. So that bokeh look at the orb-like circles. They were very similar to this, but orange and about basketball sized. And this isn't something I noticed at the time, but after thinking about it and considering what I saw, these things were apparently made of light. They were a few feet above the roof of my house, but there was no surface reflection onto the roof of my house. They were not glowing. They were not putting off light onto the house. If it was a ball of photons, you would expect there to be bleed onto the surrounding environment, but there wasn't any. So that made me wonder, what is this exactly? And there are a few different perspectives. One in which I actually entertain quite a lot is the Buddhist perspective of this being a tulpa, a psychic projection. In the Buddhist faith, a lot of the time they'll say, when you meditate, when you get into these states, yes, you'll see orbs. Ignore them. That's just noise. Like, you're meant to get past that, through that. That's all just kind of extra noise. You want to get down to the deep core of, conscious silence. And that's what the Buddhists would teach. And so, like, perhaps it's like some form of psychic projection. It's not technically real. So it's not, interacting with the real environment the way that you would expect. I don't know. These are the questions that I've then gone on to try and find out because of these experiences. But it was after I had these experiences that I literally just got a camera, went out to the forest near me, away from neighbors and human beings, put a camera on a tree branch and was just like, hey, world, these things happen to me. Let's talk about it. And then I found out that there's a whole community that have had these experiences, that are contact experiences.
Millions of people.
Millions of people. And so, yeah, that was the real introduction for me. It was through the contact, consciousness, UFO side of things. And from there, it's evolved into, various research avenues.
So, after all, God, there's so many different directions we could go here. After all of that, your thoughts then on the connection between consciousness and the UAP phenomenon, like what is at this point in your life, based on every experience that you've had and all the research that you've done and everything that you know, what do you think the connection is there between the consciousness and the UAP phenomenon?
I think there's a spectrum when it comes to UFOs, and it seems to also share this connection with consciousness. I mean, if you talk to some of the, the military guys who are claiming internal knowledge on classified programs, they'll say that, well, one of the reasons why we can't figure out how to turn these UFOs on is they seem to interact with consciousness. They seem to be in some way melded to the pilot's consciousness, as if the ship itself is living, right? And these are things that we're actually trying to do through, like biointegration in jet platforms, and like Lockheed Martin and all these guys are looking at ways to kind of reduce the level of difference between pilot and platform. So we're already trying to do that. And so I think from a technological perspective, if we're looking at flying saucers and things that might actually be alien in the more typical sense, like some other physical beings that are just more advanced than us and happen to be checking out our planet, the integration of consciousness into the actual platform and the technology makes sense. That's where we're going. Look at Neuralink and all these different elements of human science going in the neural sciences. We're trying to connect consciousness to technology. Some might even argue that that's being influenced by these beings in some way because that's what they're doing. But then you get into the deeper strata of it, which is, the contact, the consciousness related contact. And I don't think that's alien. I don't think that's flying saucer. I think that is more indicative of the astral or something. I wouldn't even be shocked to find out that these orbs are in some way like my ancestors or something, because you're coming from such a personal level. And it was a deep personal level as an individual conscious being reaching out in a way, in a form of desperation. Like, please say hello to me. I'm so alone in this vast universe. Like, can you just show me that there's something else other than this little ball with us on it? And having those interactions was like a confirmation of like, yeah, man, like there's a whole there's a whole spectrum of reality out there for you guys. You just haven't figured it out yet. And that's what it was for me. So I think that there are layers to the consciousness conversation in ufology. You have, of course, like this integration technologically, which we're on the cusp of doing, which is why you can invoke it for aliens that are more advanced and say, well, yeah, they probably do have complete haptic response with their vehicle and it connects to them. And you think of films like, have you seen Flight of the Navigator? Classic. Yeah, exactly. You know, like these kind of films where the child is connected to the ship, and you know, this is dripped into our reality because I think they understand, someone somewhere understands that this is a viable technological route for these types of creatures and beings. But this is a different level to me, to the idea of reaching out through a level of deep consciousness, and asking the universe for a sign. And when you get a sign from that universe, I don't think it's aliens hanging out in space waiting for a phone call from your mind, like, oh, here we go see him. No, like, it doesn't even make sense. Like, it has to be beyond time and space, because why would they just instantaneously respond to me in this fashion? It's not like they're just waiting for a phone call.
It's not from your mind, it's from you.
Right.
You know, and I think that's the thing, like with the getting into that meditative state, is when you get into a meditative state, you lose your mind. Your mind is gone.
Yes.
You're in a complete state of pure consciousness and awareness, and it's a spiritual state. You're in touch with your spirit, the spirit that you are. And so that spirit then is what is entangled quantumly, right? I mean, that's what is able to connect with everything else out there. That's the connection. That's the unity that exists, but the project unity, you know, it's the unity of spirit with other spirits. So the mind has to get out of the way and let that connection happen. And probably these entities that you've connected with were so excited that somebody on this damn planet has been able to make that connection.
That's another thing I thought, like, just in terms of like the relative rarity of a being kind of getting into an energetic state. For these other intelligences must be like quite an exciting moment of like, look, there's one, they're lighting up, and this is the thing, is it's transient, you know.
Right.
I sometimes hate the fact that I'm called Project Unity, just because I've got a fiery attitude. I've got a bit of a temperament, and people are like, "Oh, so much for unity!" Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, dude, that's not what it was about. And I'm a 31-year-old young man trying to figure out my life. Like, I've got a bit of an attitude sometimes. Like, I'm not always going to be the nicest dude in the world. And so, like, people kind of use like my labeling of Project Unity. Like, he tries to say he's like some guru. It's like, no, I'm not. I've never said that. I actually, from the very beginning, was like, I'm not a guru, not a meditation practitioner, and it happened to me, so I'm pretty sure it can happen to you. So I'm a very normal guy that's had abnormal things happen and has then gone on to do, I guess, in some way, an abnormal career path and talking about these things. But it's very much fundamental to my platform, and I've gone off, like I said, on very different research avenues that I do believe connect back to this. But for a lot of people, I guess it can seem like separate research. But you look at like, again, going into ancient history and consciousness, and especially when it comes to sound engineering, this is something that for me is very interesting, because I was using, not all the time, but some of the times where I was trying to do these contacts, I was using binaural tones, playing these like theta and beta tones in my headset and stuff. Because I've been doing research into the Monroe Institute of Applied Sciences and remote viewing. And in fact, remote viewing was one of the first real rabbit holes I fell down when I discovered the Freedom of Information Act library on the CIA's website, where it was just like millions of documents on remote viewing. So I started falling down these different, like, my God, they were actually studying psychic research to this level, funding it through various programs over multiple decades. And so, like, that was like one of the initial things for me, was like falling down that rabbit hole and recognizing that there is a legitimate governmental interest in understanding the human psyche, which, by the way, is something that was absolutely being done during the Cold War, because the Russians are so much further ahead than us in terms of psychic research. They were the ones that were really pushing for that research in the Cold War, and that's when the US basically caught wind of that and was like, well, we need to start figuring this out as well. Admittedly, I have absolutely lost my train of thought, so I can't remember what we were originally talking about.
Oh, all good. No, that's it's a good time to regroup then a little bit. But I mean, I think it's just a phenomenal. It just goes to show that anybody can get into that state of mind at any time, and the time that you do that is now. And you don't have to be a a meditation
No.
guru to do it. You just have to, in this moment, or whatever that moment is for you, whenever you go outside at night, whenever your opportunity is,
Yeah.
to be able to get into that state in that moment. And anybody can do that. And you can have a fiery attitude, and you can have you can be not mind dominated 99% of
Right.
the day. But if that 1% of time when you have an opportunity to connect, that you can let go of that, then
That's it, man.
yeah.
Right there. Like
Yeah.
that's what I would want to drive home to people is that, again, like I said, it's a very subtle membrane of perception that you're reaching into. And most of the time, none of us are in that perception. We're all living our normal life in a very weird system, and we have to survive and thrive and try and go against all of these different obstacles that prevent us. So it's not like we're growing up in the Amazon basin where we're being, educated in the connection with Gaia and nature. Like, we're literally born into an uphill battle when trying to get back to grounding our state of consciousness. So it's extremely fleeting moments where these things are actually actionable and possible for people to achieve, which again is one of the things I really wanted to highlight to people. Is like, look, I'm just a normal guy, but when you do get into these states, there is a shift, there is a change. And I also think it's very important to try and find empirical anchors into reality to explain this to people without them going, what do you mean? Like, just a woo-woo magic? Oh, I was sending out thoughts. It's like, no, like, if you understand that the human body is a bioelectric technology and you are immersed within an ocean of energetic mediums that create reality, it starts to become less abnormal that you could in some way use these energetic mediums that are available to you, that are immersed within you, connected, entangled fully, to communicate with other beings. I mean, we've created little glass boxes that we can send text messages and phone calls to each other through the electromagnetic field. The idea that the human brain is incapable of doing what the iPhone can do is weird to me. Like, clearly we are able to do this, but we've been severely disconnected from that reality. And that, again, is another reason why I'm very interested in ancient history and prehistory, because it seems like they were in some ways cultivating a connection to reality, complete inverse of what we're now doing. And if you invoke the idea that there was some form of great cataclysm on this earth, a global deluge or some form of global destruction, we are the post-apocalyptic survivors of that. Of course, our consciousness is going to be different. If we were in some way shamanic and sage-like and connected and divine with nature and kind of, creating these experiences and perceptions that were completely different to what we're experiencing now, we then get hit by some cataclysmic event. Well, of course, we're now just surviving. We're just surviving, and the world will be inherited by the strong men, the alpha men, and it will become a competitive driven environment, which is what we're in now. So, and I'm not like, saying the patriarchy is not what I mean by that. I just mean very logically, if you're in a post-apocalyptic scenario, the strong and frankly, the ruthless will inherit the earth. And that does seem to be where we're at now. So I think we were at a very different level of consciousness in prehistory, where we were cultivating the same type of very small, minor glimpse into that reality that I achieved, or that other people can achieve, right? They were doing it at a level that was almost industrial. When you think about various architectural building projects that seem to be designed quite literally just to induce levels of consciousness in the brain, that's something that fascinates me. And that's, again, one of the reasons why I've moved, not necessarily moved, but I've gone from like the UFO subject and looked back into prehistory and gone, there are some very interesting connections with raising consciousness, experiencing consciousness. Then you correlate that with the fact that there are so many mythologies around these times of interactions with beings, interactions with strange beings. So also maybe they really were then, because they were having these levels of communicative kind of development in consciousness that I was having in my back garden, but they were doing it for generations, and they were doing it to the point where they were building physical structures that seemed to help getting into these states. So that's one of the reasons why I've become really fascinated with the ancient history angle, is because in a lot of ways I feel like it actually confirms what I've experienced myself in the methods and the ways in which it can be achieved. You look back and you find that they were actually doing it on a level that is far greater than even our mainstream science is realizing. Like, our mainstream science is getting to the point now where we're actually understanding how audio and fundamental frequencies and infrasound and ultrasound can influence the human brain. And yet you have places like the Hypogeum in Malta, which is over 5,000 years old, this subterranean multi-geometric carved out series of chambers that resonates at exactly 110 hertz and can influence meditation and resonates through the bone cavity. And, these are levels of engineering, what they call archaeoacoustics, or if you're talking about influencing the mind through these acoustics, psychoacoustic architecture that has been deliberately engineered to manipulate acoustic energy in ways that then interacts with the human brain. We see this throughout the prehistoric and antiquated world. So it's very interesting that they had that, then we lost it, and now we're regaining it through modern science, through a different type of way of articulating it. But what they're saying is exactly the same thing, basically.
Yeah, it's interesting. And so there's this, obviously, this consciousness component or this spiritual component to the phenomenon. And you've seen that with your own eyes with these basketball-sized objects. It seems like Ryan Graves and his squadron with the sphere within the cube, or the cube within the sphere, whatever. I mean, very definitely some energetic components of the phenomenon. It seems like, but then there also seems to be like a true like extraterrestrial component, whether you want to call it future human, like Mike Masters, or something else. But when you look at the incident in Zimbabwe at the aerial school, fascinating, and they actually were communicated with by an actual extraterrestrial. I mean, what looked like a living being of some, you say extraterrestrial, so maybe that could include future human or whatever. But I mean, and then the Virginia incident with the sighting there, potentially Roswell, potentially others. And I mean, people have had sightings with beings for at least 100 years. So. And probably a lot longer. So, I mean, it seems like there's more than just a spiritual component to this.
It's a spectrum.
Yeah.
That's what I mean, is like the spiritual component seems to be on a threshold above the other things where you've got abduction and these kind of like invasive interactions with human beings against their will. Although I guess, some people would argue, oh, well, you signed a soul contract. You don't know it, but you signed a soul contract to have that. But we don't know this, do we? From face value, this is an intrusion on my space, my privacy. And even with those marks on my arm, I'm like,
what do you think those were?
I mean, so one person that got into my life when I was doing all of this research was a guy that was claiming an NSA and National Air and Space Intelligence Center background. This dude who called himself Holden, and he's become relatively well known in the UFO space because he interacted with a couple of people, including, do you know Scott Walter?
Sure.
Yeah, so Scott Walter actually met Holden. And I became friends with Scott because we found out we were mutually connected to this guy called Holden, who was feeding us information, which is something that's very common in the UFO world when you get into a position with a public outreach platform and, you're gaining some level of significance. The spooks come out of the woodwork to start feeding stuff into your ear. And, it's like retrospect, you look back and you realize that you're maybe getting taken advantage of a little bit because I was young and excited and like, oh my God, like these guys are reaching out to me. So I was listening to everything they had to say. But one thing he did say to me was that, you're essentially reaching out on all bandwidths and hoping that whatever swims up is friendly. And, like, do you really understand? Like, it was kind of like putting the fear of God into me about, making this type of contact and saying that you don't really understand. And also the idea of language, like, love, like he was like, the Greeks have 5 different definitions for the word love. So how do you know that what your definition of interaction and acceptability is will be applied to what they believe is acceptable to interact for in terms of you.
Okay.
Right. So like,
well, it's a feeling, not a word, right? I mean, you're transmitting
that's
thoughts
how I
and
felt.
feelings.
Yeah. I disagreed with him in principle just based on like, well, I had like a deep, genuine feeling of connection with reality and God and the universe and this, but again, like, who knows, you could be fooling yourself. I didn't ask for marks on my arm, and I'm pretty sure that these are not bites from bugs because they just weren't like that. I've been bitten all the time. Like they weren't like that. They were completely different. They shocked me, they freaked me out, and they lasted for about a year. So it does worry me a little bit, Matt. Like I do think, did I give permission in some way linguistically without realizing for you to interact with me in whatever way actually suits you?
And did you even need to?
And did I even need to?
Yeah. I mean, do you have any recollection of any lost time or anything strange like that?
It's difficult because again, it was relatively late. So I remember phoning my mom after it all happened and being like, I won't believe this happened. But honestly, like that is where my memory stops. And I just think I went to bed and then I woke up, got in the shower, came out, saw the marks. But it's likely that there's a missing period of time. Like I don't have the best memory anyway, but like nothing sticks out. So there is a block of time after phoning my mum and telling her, whereas anyone's guess really. So yeah, it's possible that something happened. It's possible something happened exactly at that moment. And if I'd have looked at my arm whilst out in the garden, I would have seen these marks, but I just didn't. So it's very difficult to know, and it is concerning. And you do wonder, did you give some form of permission to be messed with in that way? But nothing's bad happened from it health wise. I haven't had any complications, and frankly, everything that's happened since, in terms of where I've gone with my career and where I've gone with my research, has been beneficial. I've traveled, I've seen amazing places, spoken to amazing people, and so I'm very grateful for those experiences. And people like to say, oh, you were manipulated, they're tricksters, and it's like, well, okay, but if they've tricked me into a really fulfilling and awesome life. So I don't really know how I can look at that negatively. But yeah, I definitely hold space for this being a spectrum of things, and we can't define each one of these. We don't know, and some people have had traumatic experiences with so-called alien beings, like you said, like these physical ones, like we've got over there, like these gray beings in the Zimbabwe. I mean, that was such a strange incident. And the child who actually was right next to one of these beings, she said that it was sending these telepathic images into her head of destruction of the world, the forest burning, the seas rising. And a lot of those children in the interviews with what's his name, the psychiatrist who did the
Mac,
John Mack.
Yeah.
They were saying, and even at a young age, they were saying we need to look after the planet. That's what they were saying, is we're not taking care of this planet. But again, like Matt, like how much is that going to change things? Going down to a random school in Africa and sending some images in some children's heads, like why not do that to like the presidents or like to the global leaders?
My world,
or like,
man. I mean,
change your world, but do you know what I mean? Like in terms of like, if you're really trying to get humanity to change, is this the best method to do it?
I wouldn't tell a president. I mean, I don't know that we'd get very far from there. I'd rather tell a child than a president.
I know what you mean, like in terms of like, will the UFO land on the White House lawn? Like obviously it's not that important, but like interacting with a few children, like do you think that unless they have a long game, that they know some of those kids are going to go off and do something like?
Yeah, no, I think he just happened to be there, and the kids just happened to be there, and it was like a time to make contact with something, and knowing that there's not a threat here, and that I can potentially plant a seed and make an impact. And
like I mean, seeing the orbs was one thing, but like seeing one of those up close, standing next to me, I don't know if I'd be able to handle that. I'm not sure if I could.
Right. Yeah, so the marks on your arm then, I mean, have you ever gotten an x-ray or anything to see?
No, like I said, man, I didn't go to a dermatologist and I didn't get any x-rays or anything. Like I am kind of stupid in that way. Like I'll just not think to do these types of things.
You should see if you have some metal in you. I mean, because that would still be in there.
I mean, if something was implanted, it'll be in there.
It would be in there. It would be swimming around somewhere probably. But I'd start by checking your arm.
The Strieber implant in or something. I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, people have taken implants out of people that have that have very strange properties. I mean, so
well, maybe it'd be benefiting me. Who knows? Like, you know what I mean?
It could be. Yeah. No, you might not want to take it out, but you might want to know if it's there.
Yeah. For sure.
Was there anything like in terms of the circles and their placement or their design or anything about it that can lead to any clues as to why that was placed there or anything?
I don't know. I mean, some people like emailed me saying like they think it was like specific types of angles, and I was like, I don't know. But I mean, I'm one of those people that's like really into this stuff and then can get incredibly dismissive of things as well. I'm like, that's bullshit. Like what are you to say? So I don't.
Does it match a star formation?
Exactly, right. I mean, these are things that I really should have been doing my due diligence on and didn't, because I was just too wrapped up in the experience. And then
you got pictures though.
Yeah, I've got pictures. Yeah. I don't know if Ryan, you might be able to go on my X account, and if you type in like J Anderson marks on arm or something along those lines, you should be able to bring up a photo of it. We did that on Jamie managed to track it down on X, but I actually need to do an updated thing where that's more visible for people, because again, it's something that happened very early on in my online career, and it's not something I always bring back. And for a lot of people that have only just come around me doing ancient Egypt and Peru, they're like, wait, what? You've got orb experiences and marks on your arms? Like, yeah, that's actually where I started, was all of this weirdness, and it's led to I guess in some ways more prosaic research into just ancient history. But yeah, there you go. So it is, they had like a shine to them, like a slight shine, but there was no discomfort, there was no itching, they didn't scab over. I've never had anything like that. You know, I've been bitten by bugs. I've had, like, it was nothing like I'd actually experienced before. And they stayed like that, yeah, for about a year.
No indentation or anything?
No, it just looks like a slight shine. Like the lights on that one, like they all had that kind of sheen to them, like you can see in that top left one. The positioning might be specific. It might be, again, like I just haven't really done the due diligence I should have, I suppose. But yeah.
It looks like a very specific triangle shape with the one on the right kind of being the top point of it, you know?
Yeah.
It's very symmetric if you look at it
It
from that
is.
angle.
Yeah. I mean, dude, like maybe it is. Maybe it really is a star system or some mind-blowing thing like that. I just think that in my head, I tried to file it away as like, let's just not think too deeply about that one.
Yeah.
Just let that go.
Yeah.
But yeah, real mystery. But that was what started me doing everything I do now, and so in many ways, I'm grateful to those orbs and I'm grateful to those experiences. But yeah, it's an unexplainable element in my life, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, your thoughts in general now are that this phenomenon is tied to the ancient civilization phenomenon, and that it's been going on for a very long time, and it's tied to consciousness. And I mean, do you have like what is your just kind of overall theory then of what's really going on?
Man, I don't have an overall theory for what's really going on, like not in terms of anything well thought out, but I do think that we've just got a very limited, curated, and in some ways I would say probably classified level of history because of just the powerful groups. You talk about, you know, the Roman Empire and the Holy See and all these various elements of collecting antiquated information over time that has been securely stored away. I mean, you look at the Vatican Library and, you know, the apocryphal archives. There is so much information. There is over, what was it, like, I swear it's either 50 or it might even be 80 miles of shelving required for the information in the apocryphal archives. Either way, an absolutely mind-boggling level of shelving required for all of this history that we're not allowed to access. So for me, there's like huge gaps, not just because we lack the knowledge, but because knowledge has been taken off of the table for the general population to understand. It's been put into secret societies and ancient groups that have, you know, kept this stuff very quiet. So, you know, you want to look at like, okay, there we go. We're looking at, 80 to 85 kilometers of shelving. Okay,
That's a lot of kilometers.
that is an incomprehensible amount of that. Imagine 80 to 85 kilometers of suppressed history.
Wow.
That's wild. That's like, you know, the Area 51 in Indiana Jones, when they open up the warehouse, you got all of the different boxes.
Yeah.
That's basically what's happening. So, you know, the idea that we could even have a good, holistic, clear picture of our history when we know that so much of it has been sequestered, that in of itself is a huge problem.
8,000 books that were printed before 1501. Oh my God, dude. And it's all just being kind of just hidden there.
Yeah, I mean, the crazy thing about the Vatican archives is it works like a special access program in the government. So you have to be a very specific scholar within a very specific discipline. Then you can make a specific request for a specific piece of information, and you may get that piece of information. You don't get anything else. So it's stovepiped and siloed in terms of no lateral communication. You can't access things outside of your request. So it's completely classified information.
Imagine how much we could learn about ancient history.
That's what I mean.
I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy to think about.
So I do think that there were times in our history when we were of a very different level of consciousness. And because of that, the idea that when I think about my own experiences, if we were in that level of consciousness, then yes, we were having interactions with other intelligences that now we have, you know, just sidelined as myth and legend.
Right.
But there is so much myth and legend around the world that correlates with one another. You start going, okay, so how much of this is truly mythological and how much is actually literal and has just been misunderstood by us in modern times? And I think there's a significant degree of that, especially when you get back into like, you know, like ancient Sumer and some of these cultures that were actually visually telling us that they seem to have been interacting with beings that weren't fully human, but we disregarded. I mean, Gilgamesh is pretty much always depicted holding a lion like it's a pet tabby cat. You know, these giant beings and these stories of giant beings from every pretty much major theological text speaks of these, and even like, you know, the lesser, like non-mainstream religions will talk of this. So I think we were sharing this planet, interacting, and I actually do think that it's likely we were in some way modified, genetically modified. We are absolutely fundamentally different to everything else on this planet. Nothing, not even. You think about all of the years of evolution, billions of years of evolution, and we're the only thing that is doing what we're doing, and nothing has even come close. Like, even come close. That's what's weird to me. If we're looking at, like, natural evolution and we've just developed naturally over time, why is there not a single other creature in this world that has exhibited even just like a relatively complex culture and language? Like, there's nothing like that. Maybe dolphins, we can figure out what they're saying because they're very interesting in the way that they interact, but there is nothing doing what we're doing. And especially when you scale it up to the size of cities and super colliders and splitting the atom, we're a completely different thing. And then you look at the antiquated stories that were saying that we were built from the clay of the earth by the ancients that came down from the sky or whatever, and so many various ways of telling the same story, that a greater intellect came and was responsible for the rising of humanity. And yeah, I think that it's very likely that that's true. And so we're probably just, the genetic engineering offspring of a time that has been completely forgotten and shrouded in mythological legend, but has got some interesting data points. And when you look at the recent revelations, things like the Khafre pyramid scans, these potentially huge underground structures beneath the pyramids, and the evidence that's coming out in Peru of these huge underground structures, it's just things that couldn't have actually been done at this period of time. It starts to invoke the idea that there was a lost period. And I think that there was. And I think that during these lost periods, there were probably times when humanity was interacting with intelligences that have been essentially forgotten now.
If the Vatican had books on some of this stuff, if they had the information on some of this stuff that would indicate that we've had interactions with spiritual beings and with, extraterrestrials and with that there's been genetic engineering, any of this stuff that we might be talking about, like, would they burn the books? Would we ever even see them? Would there be 50 miles of this stuff, or would it even be locked up, or would they be would they be just keeping it locked up in secret?
I don't know. I think it's probably a mix. It probably depends on who was running the show at any given time and how they perceive this kind of information. Is it purely heretical, or is it too important for the people to understand? It depends on which one. If it's purely heretical, we'll just burn it, right? Because it's against God. But if it's something that they were themselves going, this is not what the sheep are ready for, our shepherd, the flock are not prepared for this, then perhaps it gets sequestered away. So I agree with you, because there's a good example of that actually, is the Spanish conquests in Peru and the ransacking of Peru, because Peru had the Inca had a very interesting writing system called quipu, which is literally just strings with knots, different colored strings with knots that correspond to data. Like, what a bizarre method of preserving your information. But that's what it was. They didn't have any written language whatsoever. But the Spanish burnt like 99% of the quipu.
Right.
It's pretty much all gone. There was a few, there we go, brilliant picture of quipu there. Most of this has completely been destroyed, and there was like a few Andean shamans that were allowed to basically be in the Spanish courts to read quipu. But this is an example of like how much historical knowledge has literally just been burnt away because they were considered heretical.
Right.
So you bring up a good point, that there is a degree of kind of just animosity towards things that are against the church or against the theology of the given moment, and that could result in just pure destruction of this information. But the fact that they do have such a vast archive, and we know of that, regardless of what we might not know of, they might even have larger archives, that tells me that there was certainly some level of interest in maintaining things that we're still not allowed to access. So what is that stuff? What is that? Again, one of the reasons for the secret societies like Freemasons and Templars was because they were being burnt alive. It's because they were being considered heretics for this information that was coming from ancient Egypt and Greece and Sumer. So the preservation of this knowledge through secrecy is actually sometimes the only way in which it could be preserved. And now we're in, the modern era of unpacking that and kind of looking at things like Freemasonry and going, oh, these evil people run the world. So, well, maybe they don't. Like, certainly there are power structures within these things today that are extremely concerning, but the actual knowledge that's being preserved, if we look at what they're teaching and what they're holding on to, this is stuff that stretches back thousands and thousands of years and has been preserved through these lines of secret society. So it's like a level of necessity for that kind of information to maintain. But yes, I think that it's a mix of destruction we're never going to know, and keeping things back that are clearly either too controversial for the people or just controversial for the theologic narrative of that institution.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, people just it would be a threat to the narrative,
the whole game,
basically. Yeah. So Yeah, it's pretty interesting. I skipped right over the genetic engineering part to come back to that question. But the genetic engineering part, so you think that has been happening for a long time? Do you think that explains a lot of the abductions that we've seen that people have had recently, or do you think that is a separate kind of a thing?
I mean, I think that with genetics, in terms of like, so there are ideas that we're being like kind of harvested, and like our eggs and our sperm and like various parts of our bodies are being studied and harvested. If they're an extremely advanced interstellar, trans-dimensional, space-time bending civilization, I'm pretty sure they can print their own genetic codes. Like, they don't really need to be doing that with us. So I do wonder about that. I do hold space for a pretty significant psychological operation, with military abductions, where they're using stagecraft and will actually mimic an alien abduction to continue this narrative. Because one of the big things about
in
the
the
UFO
in the 70s, you think?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
I mean, I'm pretty sure we've been rolling around in electrogravitic platforms since the 60s. So
Okay.
I think that I think there's been an impetus to create an extremely broad smokescreen around classified platforms and exotic energy. And one of the reasons, and one of the ways, sorry, to do that would be to create the other as the one that's responsible for these incredible technologies. I'm not saying that's every single case, but I think that there is a good percentage of modern abduction and interaction cases where it may actually just be humans messing with humans to protect human national security secrets. Outside of that, there are certainly some very interesting abduction stories, like Travis Walton's a very interesting one like that. To me, seems alien. So I do hold space for there being some form of interaction with us where they are taking people. I don't know why, because again, it kind of like the technological evolution of that species based on the ability to abduct and use these electrogravitic platforms and do all the things they're doing would suggest that they didn't actually need to be taking genetic information from human beings to, or they just need one sample and then they're good. I don't know. Again, I'm not a geneticist, so perhaps I'm being really stupid with that, and maybe they have very good reasons for it. But I do think that there is a component of this that's human and is being done to hide the innovations that have been happening in the Black Projects world for decades and decades and decades. So it's difficult to come to terms with, like a definitive explanation for things like abductions, because it does seem like there's a spectrum. And then you don't really hear about abductions in the ancient times, the ancient stories. You hear about revelations, or like, the lights came down from the sky, or the burning bush, or something, but you don't really hear stories from history of being taken. So I wonder if it's a very modern phenomena, and either modern just because of our perception. So our perception has become more modernized, and that's another argument some people make for the UFO subject, is it seems to evolve over time with us. So that it's like at one point, I don't know if you know, in the 1800s, there were all of these airships, and there were reports of airships doing 90-degree turns and flying off into space. And like, so at that point, the social consciousness could understand airships, but they couldn't understand airships moving in that way. Our social consciousness can understand missiles and rockets and planes, but we can't understand them moving in this way. So it's almost like it's evolving with us, but slightly ahead of us each time, like a cosmic carrot dangling in front of humanity. Like, keep going, you follow us right into the singularity. If you keep following us, you'll become the flying saucer. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Terence McKenna, is that the story of the human being is the story of the monkey becoming the flying saucer. And I think that's very true. I mean, look at what we are now. We're not monkey anymore. We're much closer to flying saucer than we are monkey. So where is our journey, and how much of that has been influenced by these other
with flying saucers?
Monkeys with flying, which is terrifying. We should shit-slinging monkeys with flying
pretty
saucers.
Much, and nuclear weapons. Yeah. That's fascinating.
Not a good idea.
Yeah. How you feeling break-wise?
I'm good.
You good? Okay. All right. Let's keep going for a few more minutes.
If you want to have a break,
no, I'm good for the moment. Yeah, I'd like to ask a couple more questions before we break. But so what is like the most interesting stuff that's happening right now? I mean, there's the I know you just got back from Peru. I was in Peru last November. Just amazing, mind blown. Just
was it your first time going?
It was. Yeah,
wow,
first
right?
time blown. Yeah. First time going, and mind completely blown. And,
where did you go?
We went to all the Sacred Valley spots and everywhere around there. A lot of little excursions to see all the ancient sites. So.
How were you with the altitude? It messed me up on the first day. Yeah.
We were okay. Yes.
Were you staying in the Sacred Valley, or you're in Cusco? Or?
We were both.
Both. Yeah. I think next time I'd stay in the valley, because Cusco, it kicked my ass on that first day.
Yeah, I mean, it's 14,000 feet.
Yeah, it's no joke.
But
like, you do feel it.
But, yep.
Yeah, Peru blows me away. I love it. I fell in love with Peru when I went there. I've been to Egypt a number of times, and I'm fascinated by it, and I intend to go back a number more times. But Peru for me was just like, it's beautiful. It's clean, and like the people are so lovely, and then the architecture. I mean, my God. You've just never seen anything quite like Sacsayhuaman when you go there. And I was so lucky when I went there, because I got up quite early. No one else was there when I first arrived, so I was just looking around this place, absolutely blown away. And I'd gone there to do documenting work on the ancient architecture, because it's one of the things that I started to become very interested in, was just how were they pulling off, precision fitting polygonal multi-angled blocks of andesite and diorite and granite into these structures the way they were. And you don't really, I mean, you do see incredible cyclopean stonework around the world, but Peru, wow, like the signature apex of achieving
so
that.
Stupid.
Oh my
it's
God,
so
right?
stupid to even like think about how that could have been possible and how that could have been done. And
especially invoking Inca, Bronze Age, copper, and
ridiculous.
It's like, come on, bud, like this is a problem here. So I was there to document them, but
and
also
there's no explanation for how it was really done. I mean, there's not been you can't recreate it.
No,
like
there's no definitive like here's a great theory with lots of backing up to it. Nope.
And you've got like just pebbles stacked on top of these walls, as if and the Inca themselves say they didn't do it.
Yeah,
So,
and then what's brilliant about look at that. Just look at that. And also, one of the things that I regret about my documentary is I didn't put myself in it enough next to these things. You need perspective. Totally. I would be like, there you go. There you go. Yeah. That's perspective. Right. This is how big these blocks are that we're talking about.
It's unbelievable.
Look at the way they fit with these multi-angles. Which one came first? Right. How did you fit them like this? And so, this is one of the fascinating issues with Peru. And like you said, they don't have a good explanation. And this is one of the frustrating things, and also a very revelatory thing when you become interested in alternative perspectives on history. Once you deviate even half an inch from the curated, institutionally approved narrative, you start going, what? There is a lot of questions here, and these guys have just glazed right over it. Like you said, they haven't got a good explanation, but we'll just leave it, and we'll just say the Inca built it and move on.
Chisels,
and so,
hammers and chisels,
hammers and chisels and copper chisels. Yeah,
it's so crazy.
And there are elements around this whole area that are just fascinating. Like there's literally directly behind this, there's a huge outcrop of diorite, like a massive magma bubble that burst through the earth and is now like solidified. And they've just got these cuts into it that are like marble steps in diorite.
Right.
Incredibly hard. Exactly. Matt's got this incredible collection of vases that are just showing you how incredibly hard these stones are. And the idea that you could manipulate it with a bronze or copper chisel is ridiculous. Now, like in Egypt, they do invoke slurries, like abrasive slurries, and there is definitely evidence that some of that could work. But in Peru, there isn't as much evidence for the abrasive slurry use. So it's a huge question of how they were able to do that. And I was out there to document, but I was also out there because there are ongoing excavations at Sacsayhuaman from the Chincana project, this archaeological team out there. And I was lucky enough to actually be one of the very first people to go down into these archaeological digs happening in Sacsayhuaman and see that this is what's so incredible is you have these huge zigzagging multi-ton cyclopean fortifications, and they're going further down than we previously understood. So they're doing like local kind of like surgical excavations around the walls where you can go over and look down and you see that these massive pillowed stones keep going underneath the ground. So it goes deeper than we previously believed. And the legends...
How deep are they going?
Well, right now, just a few meters down, but they haven't finished. That's the thing. Like, a couple of meters down. But then like the main excavation point, which is at the top of Sacsayhuaman, which is what I'm in right now, this is deep underground. This is, like, I want to say like, I don't know, 8 meters, 10 meters below ground right now. And this is Jorge Calero, who's the head of the Chincana project team. And he's maneuvering his way around to show me what they've discovered. Now, you remember, this is deep below Sacsayhuaman. This is below the megalithic site. And what we find down here is precision carved blocks that are coming out of the stone. And what's very interesting, and the reason why this team is called the Chincana project, is Chincana means labyrinth. And there are ancient Andean legends. There you go. Look at these blocks. This is deep underground, stacked next to each other. And the Andean legends say that there is a grand labyrinth below Sacsayhuaman that reaches down into Cusco, the city, and off into the Sacred Valley, connecting various sacred sites together, very much like in Egypt, where you have the same stories of vast underground structures that connect from Saqqara to Cairo. And we see underneath the ground precision carved blocks. That to me is very indicative of, well, clearly there is more to be found here, and this is what this team is trying to achieve. Is they're trying to prove that the Chincana, the labyrinth, exists, and well, they've found a bit of evidence for that, and they've found even more now, different connecting elements. I need to go back to Peru and film with them, but even when I was there, and this was relatively early on, they had found stuff.
So the blocks, the big blocks that are standing, the big walls, is 3-tiered wall, right? And they were dragged over from. It wasn't that far.
Not huge, but like the elevation and the
right. But we're saying that, okay, so those stones were dragged over and placed right there. But we're also saying that underneath those stones, we're finding that they go deeper underground, and that in addition to those stones going deeper underground, that we're also finding these caverns, and we're finding these tiered steps and these stones that have been just carved with perfect angles.
Yeah, and also if you look, I mean, it's not the pillowed stone of Sacsayhuaman that's underneath the ground. It's actually what they call the ashlar blocks. So you find that in like the Sun Temple and the Coricancha, like very precise, just square blocks. So it's not this type. It's the even more precisely shaped and formed blocks that are underground, which would actually make sense if it's connecting into a labyrinth. It's not this style. It's more precise brickwork, almost blockwork. So it's very exciting, like this, because again, this is one of those moments where we're actually getting confirmation of things that have just been rumored for a long, long time. And so these guys working on trying to, there we go. So that's the blocks, those ashlar blocks at the bottom. This is the Coricancha, the Sun Temple.
Right.
The above structure was built by the conquistadors. That black stuff is not from the conquistadors, right?
No.
But so much of this is being lumped in together. Very good example, this, just the precision of those blocks. And that's very similar to the blocks that we're actually seeing underneath Sacsayhuaman. So this could be, the beginnings of a tunnel entrance system that leads to the Chincana, leads to the Coricancha, which we're seeing right now.
Okay.
This is in the heart of Cusco, and inside this is mental. They have like these bunkers made of that type of blockwork, which are so precise, your brain struggles to even comprehend how they were made. It's incredible, but you do see this varying difference in the architectural styles. Like this pillowed work is very different, and you see this all the way through Cusco as well. But one of the best things about ancient Peru and Peru in general is that you have a fantastic juxtaposition right next to you. And one of the places that I went to recently, which is like the recent feature-length documentary that I put out, was in the Sacred Valley, was Ollantaytambo. Because Ollantaytambo, you have Inca simple rough-cut stones right next to precision megalithic work. And again, the chronology is that this is all supposed to have been created by the Inca 600 years ago, who didn't actually, like their apex, their imperial apex was like 90 years. They were around for 90 years of their apex before the Spanish came in and started wrecking shop. So they were not around for thousands of years to do hard labor and megalithic construction. Like you can try and invoke that in ancient Egypt, even though I do think that that's incorrect, that you can invoke huge amounts of slaves and man hours and time, but you don't have that in Peru. And yet you still have the same level of incredible work that you find in Egypt, sometimes even more so incredible in Peru. So when you go to somewhere like Ollantaytambo, you'll see megalithic walls that have been blown apart. Like, I mean, you went to Ollantaytambo.
Yeah.
So when you're up at the top, you see these red granite blocks that are kind of like sliding down the hillside. Some of them are half submerged into the earth. And then around this, you have the agricultural steps and you have the simple rough cut stone walls. And all of this is being attributed to the Inca. Now, if the rough cut stone walls were built around the same time period as the megalithic structures, how are the megalithic structures blown to pieces? We're talking multi-ton rose granite, diorite, andesite versus adobe mud brick and simple cement using walls that are almost pristine. I mean, look at this. So here's actually a great example, because on the left-hand side, you've got what is clearly the ancient megalithic work, which has got some nubs. Very interesting part of ancient history, the stone nubs coming out. And then to the right, you have perfect, pristine agricultural steps. Now, all of the simple stone wall structures, that was all built by the Inca. But the false applying of the megalithic work to them is laughable at somewhere like Ollantaytambo because you can see the damage difference. There's no way that if these megalithic buildings, with the destruction that you see, were around at the same time as those Inca basic walls, those Inca walls should be turned to dust based on the damage that we see from the megalithic work. So it's clear that the Inca discovered a megalithic site that had been destroyed and began to build their own structures around this. And I think Ollantaytambo, it does literally anywhere you go in this area, you look from the left to the right, you just see this incredible contrast between destroyed and degrading megalithic and very well preserved simple stone walls. So applying the sort of same chronology literally doesn't make sense. And it was one of the best places to go to document that because it's just right in front of your face.
It's just crazy to zoom in on some of those blocks, to be there and to see how they pillow out and they puff out, and like, you know, especially at Sacsayhuaman, of course, but where you have the seams between the stones, how indented that is. It's a good 4 or 5 inches of an indentation from where it comes out. And really, it overlaps and really pillows out.
And you can't fit a hair between them.
Right. But so backing up for a second on back to Sacsayhuaman, the underground stuff that's been discovered so far. So, like, is this a case of the underground stuff being like used by locals for hundreds of years and it's in good shape and they know where the tunnels are? Or is this a case of everything's kind of caved in and we're going to have to do this huge excavation to really find out what's underneath?
Looking like the latter.
Okay,
because like there's, you know, rumors and certainly people in Cusco have found dig sites in their own properties. It's actually quite well known. Like, you know, you can dig underneath your garden and find all sorts of amazing things, but actual legitimate tunnel entrances that are complete and not caved in, and no one's found things like that. It's all myth and legend, and this is the first inference that we're getting that this could be true. So yeah, it's likely that this is collapsed. It's likely that you're actually just going to be excavating blocks and bricks, not actually finding a fully complete tunnel.
Right.
Maybe some of them could be preserved, who knows? But until we get down there, no one's going to know. So it's just great to see that work is actually being done, because, you know, you look at places like Egypt and everyone's like, kind of like, come on, like, when are we going to get some digs? It's very difficult to get permission to dig on the Giza Plateau. They're very funny about that. So it's refreshing at least to see somewhere where it's an incredibly important megalithic site where that's happening.
So shouldn't ground penetrating radar be able to like maybe map out some of the tunnels and the pathways?
Yeah, that's what they're using. So like if you watch some of my Peru videos, you'll see when I'm with the Chincana team, they've got their GPR tools. They're scanning all around there. They found particular areas where strong signatures are coming up and they're digging.
Okay.
So they are finding that. Obviously, like GPR scan, it's not like obvious. It's difficult to read, and so they're having to, you know, use specialists and take their time with it. It's not like you just go, oh look, there's a tunnel on this scan. So they're having to be, you know, very surgical and precise with it. But real work's being done, and they're very, you know, they're allowing people. That's what's refreshing to me as well, is that it's not being restricted. They are allowing Western journalists and people to come in. Graham Hancock was there a week before I was there, you know, and they're letting us down into the site, film it, come up with your own perspective. They believe it's the Inca. Some of them believe it's the Inca. Some, like myself, believe it's not the Inca. And so it's okay to have those, you know, disagreements. Whereas in Egypt, it's a bit more kind of like it's our narrative or the highway, right? So yeah, it's great to see that's happening in Sacsayhuaman, and I expect it to continue developing, and hopefully I'll go out there again and cover it when they find even more.
Love it. More great stuff to cover. I got a lot of questions to ask, but let's take a break. I want to get let's get a bite to eat.
Sounds good.
All right, cool. So in terms of kicking it back off, I mean, we had a couple of interesting conversations over lunch that I kind of wanted to revisit a little bit of. So we talked a little bit about Lou Elizondo and your thoughts there, and potentially as like a disinformation guy. And you mentioned that on Joe Rogan, took some flack from saying that. In addition to him, like, who for you are the most obvious kind of disinformation people out there right now in the UFO world?
I mean, okay, well, you got to be a bit careful with that. I'm not just going to throw names around, but I think that when you look at the structure of how this modern disclosure movement developed, and especially when you look back on it, it's quite clear that there was an agenda at play that I don't think is really for the public benefit. And you can see this because, so the reason really that UFO disclosure became a thing 2017 onwards is from the most unlikely of sources, a rock star, Tom DeLonge from Blink-182.
Right.
So a lot of people might not know that Tom DeLonge, former, well, not former, I think they're still running Blink-182, and he's also got another band, Angels and Airwaves. He's kind of the main reason why we're having this conversation. And he, back in 2015, was on different podcasts talking about how he's getting connected to all these government guys, and you've got no idea what's coming. Like, I'm getting connected to all these different people. And then he actually told this story. I think it was on Jimmy Church, Fade to Black, like 2016, where he describes how he was basically invited to a Lockheed Martin friends and family gathering. Because what people need to understand about Tom is that he's been a UFO guy almost all his life, and he's a rich, successful man, so he's able to actually facilitate his interests and, find people, get people on for talks, invite them to his house, whatever it might be. So he's quite deeply embedded, and he had friends and connections that were in places like Lockheed. So this guy reaches out and says, like, we're having a friends and family gathering. It's a bit of an event at the main site, and would you like to introduce the bosses onto the stage? And he said, and this is on the podcast with Jimmy Church. He was like, and I said yes, but I want 10 minutes with your bosses afterwards. And they were like, okay. So he went and he did the introduction on stage, and then he describes how he got led through multiple corridors with armed guards and speakers playing white noise, like, kind of skiff environment type of stuff. And he gets brought into this room with the, Lockheed Skunk Works, all these major guys for the corporation. And this is where he pitches the idea of To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, which was the initial jumping off point for what is now the disclosure movement of the modern era. It started with Tom DeLonge presenting to the world, but first to these government guys, this framework called To the Stars Academy, which was meant to be like this multi-pronged attempt to disclose information to the public. But he was very clear on these podcasts that he went in there with a respect and reverence for these people and to be of service to these people. So he wanted to provide them with a viable roadmap that they could then use to bring out some of the things that they've been holding back for so long because they didn't have a roadmap to do it for the public. He was like, this is how we're going to do it. And he presented them with this template. And then it was after that he gets introduced to Lou Elizondo. He gets introduced to Christopher Mellon, the former Deputy Secretary of Defense. And, all these, what's the guy, Joseph, I forgot his name. Either way, he gets connected to a whole bunch of high-level government guys, and then these people are the ones that have come on to replace any previous narrative that might have been discussed in ufology. And one of the things that I brought up on Joe Rogan is that even though I'm not like a die-hard fan of Stephen Greer, and I think that there are issues, we're all fallible, and Greer's got an ego, and like I don't trust everything he says. I know that CE5 is real because I've experienced it, so I do take him seriously, but with everyone in ufology, pinch of salt with the big claims and, like the sources tell me this, the sources tell me that. That's where I start to just, trust my own intuition more than just blindly trusting a speaking figure. But Greer was the main show. Greer was the main guy in ufology. He was the one that was putting out Netflix documentaries like Unacknowledged and all these different ones that were hitting like multi-million views. I mean, his Netflix, Unacknowledged was like #1 on Netflix for quite a while. So if you think about it from the perspective of the national security apparatus, and especially people within that who are knowledgeable on this issue, you've got this rogue element out there saying that there are illegal anti-congressional programs that have been running for decades, that have been holding back humanity for over a century, that there is this complete stagnation in our ability to evolve technologically due to national security, and this is illegal, and these people should be imprisoned, and, like hard line. That is not a great narrative for the US government to accept and bring on board. Like, oh yeah, let's invite Greer and, he can tell people what's going on. So obviously there's a problem there. But they didn't have any sort of viable route to combat him because how could you? He's popular, he's out there, he's on Netflix. They're not popular. They might be powerful within the government, within the national security infrastructure, but they're not popular public outreach. So how do you actually combat someone like this? No idea. And then suddenly in walks a rock star with an incredible outreach to the youth of today, and he's offering you a viable method of essentially combating Greer's method, because he said to them, I want to be of service. This is the idea, but you guys run it. You guys tell me what you want to do. And so suddenly you get Lou and all these guys coming out. The New York Times gets activated. When was the New York Times reporting on UFOs before this? Suddenly, bam, New York Times, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. Lou Elizondo runs it. He wasn't He was made aware that the Secretary of Defense wasn't being briefed on this program, and he resigned out of protest, and he went to the New York Times and he told them all about this, but somehow didn't end up like Julian Assange or Edward Snowden when he's revealing some of the most apparently even more sensitive than classified conventional secrets, right? We're talking deep black, exotic aliens, energy, like this is the kind of stuff that really he shouldn't have ever have been able to say openly, especially through the New York Times. And then you have quite clear admittance from Lou. Like he was on a podcast where he said, I'm not a UFO guy. I never will be. I'm a counterintelligence, counter-espionage, counter-terrorism guy. And it just so happens that I was asked to bring that skill set into the UFO community, which to me is a very weird admittance of almost like, I'm not interested in UFOs. I am a professional spinster. I am a professional liar. I'm a professional manipulator for the good of the national security of America. Like, that's essentially what he did. And in his books, again, he admitted that he was considered the torture czar of Guantanamo Bay and was even referred to as the Darth Vader of Guantanamo Bay, which is, these are pretty intense titles to be kind of proud of and flaunting. So I started having issues with people like Lou for a number of reasons. But it does feel like to me this was all done to combat a very disruptive narrative from people like Greer, which was implicating the US government in generational crimes, holding humanity back. So if you look at the narrative we're being given now in comparison to what someone like Stephen Greer was saying, yeah, okay, they're saying, right, there are things flying around. There are things in the sky we can't explain. And we have no idea what they are. We just don't know. We're in the same position as you guys. Let's try and figure this out together. And that, to me, is not true. They have been hiding this for a very long time. They've developed technologies, and I think that they're using the alien and the mysterious other, like I said previously, as a smokescreen to protect the classified projects and the exotic innovations that have been made over about 4 or 5 decades. So, yeah, I just like to wrap that up. I just feel like they didn't have a viable method of combating someone like Greer, and then Tom DeLonge walks in and essentially provides them with that viable method, and now we're dealing with their agenda and their narrative. And even if it does yield some information, which quite frankly it hasn't really done yet in terms of real hardcore actionable intelligence, it's going to be done, and it seems to be done in a way that's trying to paint the government in the best possible light, in light of potentially generational crimes.
Yeah, one of the things that they revealed, I think, was the Tic Tac incident, right? And so...
Well, that video was already online.
Okay.
So that video was actually already online in like some military discords. It had actually been shared previously. So like the whole story of them getting this Tic Tac UFO and the other ATFLIR, forward-looking infrared camera from the fighter pilots, the video footage, that was actually already out in the ether. Okay. So, there again is another method of kind of controlling perception, is like, we got all of this out. And you do see people saying, well, without them, we wouldn't have had the Tic Tac and all of this. It's like, well, they certainly made people very aware of the fact that these were videos. But also one of my issues with that is that, have you ever noticed that all of the different UFO videos that get released by the government through official surveillance platforms are incredibly low resolution black and white imagery? When it's a Russian plane that's coming a little bit too close to one of ours, we've got 4K full color imagery 4K that we put on the news. Like, look at what this Russian fighter is doing right now. Mm-hmm. So I find that interesting, that there's always a level of ambiguity with the releases. It's never definitive, right? So it's like, oh, for a believer, wow, that's a Tic Tac, that's a UFO. But there's not enough information for a skeptic to agree, so the skeptic will argue. So it doesn't solve anything. None of these video releases have solved anything, because it still just creates a question mark. The believers believe it, the skeptics don't. It's not high fidelity enough to convince the skeptics. And that's where it's an issue. It's like, well, where is the 4K full color video of an orb or a flying saucer? And so, and so it feels like a distraction.
So your thought, in terms of it being a distraction, I mean, your thought is that they're attempting to change the narrative away from what is a more truth-based narrative, and they're bringing it towards a narrative of, this is national security and there's an imminent threat, and we have to unite. We have to give the government all of our tax dollars so that they can build up Space Force and protect us against these evil killers who are here to destroy us.
It's certainly like a perspective that a lot of people believe in, like with the whole Project Blue Beam, this idea. I can't remember who actually popularized that to begin with, but this idea that the governments are going to use a fake alien invasion scenario to justify, like you just said, like a new world order and all of that. And maybe it's possible, but what's very clear is that they are providing us with a level of evidence that is not actually able to prove the point. So it keeps it in this kind of murky area of possibility. And they are absolutely, in my opinion, trying to deviate people away from the idea that this could be classified projects. So this is black budget, Lockheed, Boeing, that type of thing. I think they want to keep that very far away from the conversation. And the threat narrative, as you just rightly pointed out, has been pushed from essentially day one. Threat to national security, threat to sovereign airspace. They're coming over they're shadowing our carrier strike groups and watching us in theaters of combat and all of this kind of stuff. And it all is wrapping up to be this perception of we're being observed, we're being watched, we don't know by who. They don't seem to have good interests at heart. It seems militaristic, But then, like you said, like the Zimbabwe event, there's so many other counter events where like they seem to be trying to tell us something.
Right.
So again, it feels like perception management. And it's a complete opposite to what Greer was saying. And now a lot of people take an issue with Stephen Greer because he's like, they're all peaceful. It's all peaceful out there. And I say, I don't believe that. I think that there are so many different ways in which a civilization could gain access to extremely powerful technology absent the conscious evolution that would be required to handle it sensibly. I mean, look at us. We're a great example of that. And we're already in space. We're already in space. We might not be exploring the far reaches, at least not conventionally and publicly, but we're a weaponized warring species that has space-based capabilities. So the idea that everything else out there that has achieved interstellar travel has achieved interstellar travel by traversing over the hurdle of internal conflict and internal problems, I don't find that to be as logical as maybe Greer would consider it. So like, certainly there are issues, but this is a complete inverse now in the modern era where it's just an unknown threat. That's basically what we're being told is an unknown threat. And it's like, where's the curiosity? This should be a scientific exploration, not a military national security exploration. There has been not one single, attempt at rudimentary communication with these craft. They're not putting out any sort of proposals for like, right, so how can we, get DARPA and these other really clever brain think tanks to come together and figure out how to communicate? None of that. It's all just be freaked out, be worried, be concerned.
It might be happening behind the scenes, I mean.
Well, I would imagine it is. But that's what I mean in terms of like the conventional story that the world is being given. It's just an unknown, anomalous threat that's buzzing our military and is very interested in our nuclear silos. And it's like, that all sounds terrifying when you just tighten it up into a little ball like that. But as we've just discussed throughout this entire podcast, the UFO spectrum is vast. And so applying just one sort of narrative is very disingenuous.
Right.
And then, of course, like I said, like, the evidence that there is a level of exotic energy classified project research from like the 50s, since like basically earlier than that, really, since Tesla died, when they raided his labs and they took everything. Like, the guy who was responsible for overseeing all of the documents that Nikola Tesla had that were raided by the FBI was John G. Trump, Trump's uncle, his MIT physicist uncle, who was an electrical physicist, one of the most preeminent at the time. And he was the guy that was responsible for overseeing all of the different papers and patents that they seized from Nikola Tesla when he died. And he actually said that he came across correspondence from Nikola Tesla and the British royal family and Tsars in Russia about acquiring an incredible weapon of, anomalous abilities. Like, it was a super weapon of incredible capacity that John G. Trump had never actually figured out what it was. But he said in an interview that he believed it was able to exercise destruction over extreme distances using energy from the ionosphere or something. He was like very interested in this whole perspective that Tesla was tapping into the ionosphere to use energy, which is what he was trying to do. And so that's like another level of this where it's like, clearly they have had knowledge sequestered and classified in high energy physics and the stuff that Tesla was doing. That then evolves into people like T. Townsend Brown. You familiar with T. Townsend Brown?
I did a whole episode on him.
Yeah, exactly. There are viable routes. And then around the 50s, 60s, it just vanishes, right? So like, the Cold War, all of these security walls come up around the classified research and it just never left. So you have like an actual kind of chronology. And even in the general mainstream physics journals of the 50s and 60s, it was like the consensus is the next thing is gravitational control. The next thing is gravitational propulsion. And that all just vanished. And then it became, pseudoscientific to discuss it. So something happened around the Cold War era. I think they made some breakthroughs. They kept it very quiet, and then they essentially launched an operation of ridicule on these types of subjects and lumping anti-gravity with flying saucers and gray aliens and green men, and it made it into a laughingstock, you know.
So how do you think we ever? I mean, there's a non-human intelligence component of this. There's a human component. There's a human intelligence component of this. There's, potentially, it's a very complex situation. There's an energetic component of it that we just can't explain necessarily. I don't even feel like the government even knows really. It doesn't feel like there's anybody that really knows the full story.
Oh no, for sure not the full story. But the government in itself is a bit of a misnomer, isn't it? Because 99% of the government doesn't know jack about this subject, right? And like the congressmen, the senators, they don't know anything.
When I say the government, I guess I mean like the black budget people within the Pentagon that are feeding money to Lockheed and to the there's a group of people that's in the know about some of the things that we're doing as a country to either reverse engineer or just engineer this technology. So those guys, that group of people that, maybe there's another group militaristically somewhere in another silo that has, recovered craft
Well, I think that's true. I think that there's a lot of puzzle pieces floating around, and maybe not all of them have been connected even in the black, because again, silos and stovepipes, they don't communicate with each other laterally. And if it's a USAP, if it's an unacknowledged or waived or carved out special access program, no one knows it exists other than the people that are within it.
Right.
If you're not on that bigot list, you're not going to be in that program, and you're not even going to be told it exists, even if you've got the correct tickets, which is something that was brought up in a very famous piece of UFO documentation that's called the Admiral Wilson documents, or the Eric Davis notes. Are you familiar with those?
Yeah.
So that's another situation where, people, to give people a quick nutshell on what that is, Dr. Eric Davis, who's a very prominent DOD physicist, and a admiral, Thomas Admiral Wilson, who was the director of the DIA and was like a very high level admiral, like 5-star admiral. And there's a series of documents that are essentially a transcript of a conversation that apparently happened between Eric Davis and Admiral Wilson in the car park of EG&G Special Projects Building. There we go. This is the Eric Davis meeting with Admiral Wilson. And these notes only came out into the public because of the death of an Apollo astronaut, the death of Edgar Mitchell. Edgar Mitchell was a big UFO guy, and especially when he came back from his moon trip, he was a big UFO guy, so who knows quite what happened there. But he, when he died, his estate was obviously being reviewed, and his family were getting rid of a bunch of like old documents and things that he had, and it was a friend that stepped in and said, "Can I have his UFO stuff? Like, you come across anything like that, give it to me." And so within that kind of like big compilation of documents was this transcript of an apparent conversation between Eric Davis, who Edgar Mitchell knew, and he was actually a part of a group with Eric Davis, with Robert Bigelow, called the National Institute of Discovery Science, NIDS, which was the original owners of Skinwalker Ranch. So Skinwalker Ranch was actually being, studied by this group called NIDS, run by Robert Bigelow, with Department of Defense contracts. Like, there was like actual DOD interaction with Skinwalker Ranch before it changed hands and is now like a TV show. So the reason we know about these Admiral Wilson documents is because a friend of Edgar Mitchell passed these on, and they got out into the wild, and they became, published online. And what's quite interesting about those documents is that obviously you have this admittance from an admiral, if it is real, that he was denied access to these programs. He was following on the advice of people he had spoken to, including Stephen Greer. He mentioned Stephen Greer in the documents. And following their advice, he was pursuing, the data trail through the Pentagon. Obviously, he was a very highly cleared, multiple tickets guy, so he could just ask and receive indexes on programs and what's going on. And he discovered that a series of programs that were separated from each other, essentially when connected, was a UFO program. It was a reverse engineering program. And he describes in these documents how, he was trying to get in touch with these people. Eventually, he was granted a meeting with like the security manager, a lawyer, and another person who was present. And they described themselves as the watch committee or the gatekeepers.
Okay.
And they basically said to him that it is a reverse engineering program. It's a vehicle that they believe can travel through air, sea, and potentially other dimensions. It's been, years and years, and they've made no progress with it whatsoever. Right. And so that's the story they gave the admiral, but they denied him access to the program. Like, he was really angry and was like, I should be having access to this, given my background, given who I am. And they were basically just like, sit and swivel, mate. You're not getting it. So he went back to the SAPOC, the Special Access Program Oversight Committee, and raised this issue, and was basically told by the head of SAPOC, I forget who the chairman was at that point, that he will face an early resignation and will have some stars knocked off of his shoulder if he continues down this path. So he was basically told, shut up. And this is, someone who was extremely high in the government. Just going back to that whole point of these guys don't know anything. Most of them, even someone like Admiral Wilson, was not allowed into this program. So the government in of itself is completely in the black. They don't have any knowledge of this. There'll be select people that have knowledge. And even Admiral Wilson, when he was shown like who was on the list of people that were in this program, there were no government representatives, all private corporate. There'll be like a liaison between some shady element of the government, but it's mainly in the private sector. And that's where I think at some point in the chronology of like the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, a change of hands happened from official US Air Force and CIA to Lockheed, Boeing, aerospace companies getting private access to this stuff, and then having like a loose connection to government, probably for plausible deniability, right? So that the government can say, we didn't even know about this. Lockheed was doing its thing without us. So there's a level of kind of like plausible deniability inserted into that. And one thing that I'll say about the Admiral Wilson documents, which I have to tap myself on the back for, because the only piece of evidence we have is those documents. And a lot of people were suspicious of that because, well, you're just trusting the word of, Eric Davis, and some people don't trust him. I don't really know how I feel because he's connected up with Lou Elizondo and all these guys. So I'm a bit suspicious of all of these guys. But I actually met up with and interviewed an individual who's named in those documents. So there's a man named in those documents called Oak Shannon. Oak Shannon was the former special projects manager for Los Alamos National Labs, and he'd been there for a number of years. And Eric and Admiral Wilson are discussing Oak Shannon in this conversation. He says, Admiral Wilson says, I spoke to Oak Shannon on the phone, big Oak fan, and he said that it was okay to speak with you. He's not answering his phone calls right now because he's got health problems, and his wife Linda is answering the calls. It was just like a description of who Oak Shannon was. And then I actually reach out. Oak Shannon reaches out to me. We connect. I go out to Florida, actually. He doesn't live here anymore, but he did live in Florida. And I met up with him, and he confirmed to me that the Admiral did phone him to ask about Eric Davis prior to meeting up with him. He phoned him up and wanted to understand if this was a trustworthy person for him to have a meeting with unofficially. And Oak Shannon validated him and said, I know Eric and I trust him. And he did have a heart attack, Oak Shannon. He died on the operating table briefly and was brought back to life. His wife, Linda, was handling all of his calls. So outside of just a piece of paper that came out of an Apollo astronaut's house and was, claiming all these things, we now have a real person who's not in the UFO field. He was not connected. It was difficult to convince him to actually speak to me because he was like, look, I'm just living my life with my wife. I'm happy. I'm a born-again Christian, just trying to live my life. And so he has no in with the UFO world. He's not trying to be a person. And he confirmed it. He confirmed the Admiral spoke to him. So like those papers are a very good inference of what kind of secrecy we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the kind of secrecy where even a director of the Defense Intelligence Agency isn't being briefed. All right. So that's a serious level of keeping it from the conventional level of government. To your point. So
the president would never see it.
One of the only presidents, other than Eisenhower, because I think Eisenhower knew a lot, and that's why he did his speech about beware of the military-industrial complex, and he did this long speech about how the compartmentalization of this is extremely dangerous for our freedom, for our democracy. He knew, and maybe some presidents prior to him knew. I think he was the last to be briefed properly. I do think Obama knows more than most. I think out of all of the modern presidents, although I suppose George Bush as well, George Bush Sr., former director of the CIA, I think he might have had a bit more knowledge than most. But Obama seems to have a bit of knowledge and infers it in various ways, including this recent
on podcast,
podcast, which just seems like political theater to me. The fact that the guy didn't ask a single follow-up question is just completely insane to me. So you have that element of Obama, who's gone out a couple of times on late night shows and said, the aliens exercise strict control over us. Like I'm laughing, so you can't take it seriously, but maybe I'm saying the truth. So yeah, like he's an interesting character because I think that he he may have been read in a little deeper than most. Actually, there's one other time where I think it was Stephen Colbert who was interviewing him. And it was a very interesting moment. This was after a couple of times he'd gone public saying things, including the late night show laughing and all that. This was more somber, and it just felt quite sincere, where he was asking questions, and Obama said, getting information out of, the various departments of government, even as president, can be very challenging. And he was like, UFOs? Anything about UFOs? And he went, certainly asked about it. And he just went, I can't tell you. Sorry. It was just this little pause, and he just went, sorry. And it just felt really like I actually can't. And I do feel bad that I can't say anything. So yeah, Obama more so, but...
And then Trump's response to the Obama podcast was kind of odd, right? I mean, where Trump comes out and he says like, oh, he said something? Oh, well, he's in big trouble. You can't do that.
Oh, I didn't even see see
Yeah,
I didn't come across
something
that.
like that.
Did
Yeah, Ryan, you might be able to play that. I think he was on his airplane, maybe in maybe it was Leviette or whatever her name is, was standing behind him, and it was the reporter that was talking to him. Yeah, and he was.
Barack Obama said that aliens are real. Have you seen any evidence of non-human visitors to Earth?
Well, he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that.
So aliens are real?
Well, I don't know if they're real or not. I can tell you he gave classified information. He's not supposed to be doing that. He made a big mistake. He took it out of classified information. No, I don't have an opinion on it. I never talk about it. A lot of people do. A lot of people believe it. Do you believe it, Peter?
Well, if the president can declassify anything that he wants to, so if you want to make an announcement.
I may get him out of trouble by declassifying.
Whoa, yeah, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I must have missed this one.
It's a big deal, man. That was just a couple days ago. So
I mean, Trump in his typical candor of like, trying to like one-upmanship and everything, but who knows, right? Like he might have been legit. Yeah. Although Obama didn't say anything specific, so I don't think he breached any sort of classification.
Well, for Trump to say that that's classified information and he shouldn't be doing that, and that's classified, that he's trying to say that he knows without saying that he knows.
If anything, he actually revealed more than Obama just then.
He didn't even know what Obama said.
Right.
And that's why it was it was such an incredible response, because he had no idea what Obama said, and he's like, oh, that's classified information. You can't talk about that. You can't be doing that. It's a great point, Matt. So it's like, it's a big deal that he was using that moment to be like, his ego took over, and he's like, I already know, and like he can't be saying this stuff. Like he's reprimanding the Democrat, I mean, that's all ego. Like
exactly.
And so obviously he knows something. And he used that as an opportunity to say that the presidents know more than we can tell you.
Yeah, no, you make a brilliant point, and like he actually revealed more than Obama in that situation just by inferring that this is classified information. It's like, well, how do you know that, sir? So I mean, who knows? He might become the disclosure president. He might be the one that does it, and it would be, I guess in some ways it would be suitable for a personality like Trump.
I feel like they all know that they're going to get killed if they come out and they try to, pursue this or get too much information out there.
Why?
Yeah.
Why? What is it about this that is apparently that serious? I mean, is it just the idea that society will collapse by freaking out? Because I actually don't think we would. It's don't.
80 years of a cover-up.
Right.
And it's
implication of criminal activity. And,
criminal activity, murder.
Yeah.
I mean, silencing people, families, threats, like all of that is once you admit that you've been covering this up, then you have to address all of the 80 years of history. Yeah. That's the problem with being disclosure.
Absolutely.
So a president might be like, let's talk about that. That way we're not talking about the Epstein files, but at the same time, he knows that he can only take that so far.
Yeah,
I feel like otherwise, because Obama, you could see it in his heart. I'd like to tell you that, but and I'm not a political person. I don't take sides politically at all. But you could see when he said it, he had a genuine desire to be like, I'm really sorry, but I want to talk about this, but I can't. And so
what's crazy is he even provided a bit of a follow up for that guy. Because he addressed it again, like in just terms of like, there are things we're just never told and things we can't be told. It's like, that's why I feel like that was theater, because he was given a second opportunity to kind of be like, sir, what exactly do you mean by this? And he didn't take it. So, Yeah, that whole situation seems strange. Obama does seem to be a more read-in president that has a level of sincerity when he addresses it that is weird, and I do find to be like, suggestive of a level of knowledge. And then Trump, like you said, Trump's ego, it can work into our benefit, because like you said, like his desire for one-upmanship and to prove them wrong and to, kind of like scold Obama just meant that he completely overblew that situation.
Exactly. Without knowing anything about it.
Without knowing anything. Yeah. So, he might be a disclosure president by accident.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Just, no doubt. It'll be interesting to see. I mean, do you have any thought or concept of like how this might play out in terms of disclosure? If we do get disclosure, like what does that look like? How does that happen?
Again, my concerns are that any official greenlit government-sanctioned disclosure is just going to try and serve the agenda of the government. So, it's very difficult. And like I said, like there are so many people in my generation and the generation below me and above, but, very much in the kind of younger generations, there's just such a level of distrust within the institutions and within government that I just don't see a meaningful disclosure happening absent mistrust, absent people just going, nah, this is a distraction. This is a red herring, as people like to say. This is just another red herring to distract from, whatever it might be, Epstein, Ukraine, Israel, whatever it might be. And so I just think that there's actually not a very good viable method. I think that the ultimate disclosure, frankly, would be these things turning up in a really obvious way. Right. And like, how do we deal with that if the Anunnaki
Well, they kind of did in New Jersey, right?
Yes, I mean, there's been a couple of events where there's been mass sightings, but I mean, like literally making themselves fully known and like objectively clear. There's a mothership
like
hanging
television
in the sky
shows and
like,
shit.
Well, I don't know, but on the JRE, on Joe Rogan. Now that would be sick, right? Like
they can come right through this wall if they want. I mean, we'll air them right now. Absolutely.
So you're from the Pallades. That's fascinating. Tell me about that. Like you know what I mean? Like that'd be so weird. That is how I almost envision it in the modern era. Is it's not governments, it'll be a podcaster or something that gets some radical information out there or something like that. But yeah, I don't know, because disclosure in of itself, like people kind of treat it like a magic word, like disclosure's coming. It's like, what does disclosure actually mean?
I think it just means that a politician or someone that people trust actually come out and say something.
So we've had disclosure though.
Well, like the highest level though. Yeah. I mean, I think that's because you've had like Marco Rubio come out and he's pretty freaking high up there. I mean, you've had a lot of people come out and talk about
Obama just said
this.
aliens are real.
Obama did, disclosure. Yeah. But then he comes out the next day and has to cover it up. And he says, well, what I really meant was, there's thousands of them, trillions and trillions of planets with trillions and trillions of stars,
backpedaling.
Yeah, totally.
No,
so,
I get you. I mean, maybe, like that's the thing is like, would people still trust it? Even if it came from like, a president and they were like, aliens are real. We've known about this for a number of years. No. We know that there are certain star systems they come from. People just wouldn't trust them. Yeah.
I think we have to get the craft from Lockheed. Yeah. You got to get that on TV. You got to put that in a freaking museum or in a glass case or something and let people walk around it and see it. And you got to put the bodies out if we have bodies. I mean, if Grush, is right, that a lot of these crash retrievals came with non-human biologics, like we got to put that stuff out there. That's the way to let people visit this stuff. I think that's the only way.
I agree. My issue with people like David Grush is that everything they're saying is secondhand testimony. Like he didn't see biologics. He didn't see UFOs. He was told and he was like, shown things.
Is he a psyop too?
Well, this is the thing I worry about that. I just worry that it's so multifaceted that they have to compromise people within the network to spread a message. And so he fully would be believing what he was shown. It's not that he himself is a bad asset or anything like that. It's just that I think that there's a level of trickery going on within the government to convince them that there is this narrative, and it helps them when it comes to the whole smokescreen of the classified projects. So they're like, well, we don't know what's going on. Like we've seen some bodies and we've seen some stuff. So I worry that people like Rush have been used a bit actually. And again, like all of these testimonies from people in the congressional settings, it is secondhand testimony. I was told this. I was explained this by a superior. And it's like, okay, but where does this storyline end? I want the actual file, the object, the piece of biological material, and we never get there. We just run around in these circles, and I wonder if they're kind of
There's some off-planet materials out there. I mean, for sure.
There are some very interesting materials out in the wild.
Yeah.
And in private collections as well.
Right.
You know?
Who's the professor that studies this at like it's Harvard or MIT or something? And he's got a bunch of it. And
I can't remember his name off by heart, but I mean, and you know, even Chris Bledsoe was given a piece of metal from like a NASA guy that they wanted him to try and interact with, and like. You know, so, you know, there's debris and there's metal, and that's actually another issue I have with To the Stars Academy is when they first came out, they released something called the Adams Project, which was the acquisition of data and material. And they put out basically like an APB saying if you have material, let us know. We'll come, we'll evaluate. If we think it's interesting, we'll study it.
Yeah, we'll steal it from you.
Well, they did, because they took a bunch of material from people and then they put it under a cooperative research and development agreement with the U.S. Army, with the U.S. Air Force, U.S. Army, and it's gone. It's gone. Like, you know, there's been like a couple of inferences of a study, but the actual materials have just vanished off of the face of the earth.
Fucked up, man.
Yeah, dude. Like, so that's what I'm saying is like, you know, there are things that have happened like from TTSA and just the way it's been done that just tell me that they're doing this for a completely different reason. It's not transparency.
No.
But yeah, materials have been recovered, some very weird materials, and you know, I'm not against the idea that there have been some form of crashes, although I struggle with like the whole concept of hyper advanced alien species crashing on planets, and you know, surely they can scan the atmosphere, surely they know what they're dealing with, and maybe I lean a bit more towards the idea that we've actually developed weapon systems that can disengage some of these vehicles in the whole scalar electromagnetic weaponry field, which is extremely black project classified work. So you know, there's a possibility that we've developed the ability to actually disengage some of these vehicles, but it's hard to know what's true when it comes to like the studying of particular metals and things like that.
It's such a muddy topic.
It's very muddy.
It's
one
so
of the
tough.
muddiest.
It's
actually.
like, it's like
You know?
shit mud. It's so deep, and it's like, you know, it just stinks.
It does.
And it's like it's so difficult to get to the truth, and that's why for me, like incidents like the Ariel school in Zimbabwe, where you've got 80 school children who all see the same thing
and came out later in life
and
saying
still are all saying the same thing.
Israel.
I want to get some of those kids,
That'd be
adults
good.
now,
That'd be
onto
really
the
good,
show
actually.
and have them sit here on a couch and talk to me about
For
what
sure.
they saw. Like that would be awesome.
maybe move that. It might trigger them a little bit.
Yeah,
but-
I'm gonna move. Ross is gonna have to leave, unfortunately. Yeah, but I mean, and there's so many incidents though that are like that are isolated occurrences that we can look at and get information from, and then there's all these people with their stories and their, you know, it's just impossible to know who you can believe.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, it's very difficult, and for me, like at least from my perspective, I just fall back on my own experiences. At least I know, I do know it's not all a lie. Like there is something mysterious and real and unintangible, like right now. But you really have to be careful in the UFO field, especially if you are an experiencer, because you are inherently going to have a bias because you've already seen something. So you're looking for even more confirmation. Yeah. And I look back on like maybe my earlier years of research, and I see like a lot of my own bias of wanting to believe and just kind of accepting things at face value, which I no longer do as much as that, because I think that you need to interrogate these statements and, you know, these ideas that these people within the intelligence community are dripping into the public. Like it's not acceptable to me to just accept it as truth because it's some high level government dude. In fact, I'm actually more skeptical of it because it's a high level government dude. And that's a weird thing in the UFO community that's happened, a bit of a flip, because if you look at like, you know, before 2017 and, you know, back into the 90s and 80s, it was just like the government, they're corrupting us. They're ones that are involved in covering this up and we don't trust any of them. And now we're being flipped over to like, we have to trust the government. The government's doing this the right way. Trust Lou, trust Chris Mellon. And it's a complete inverse of how the UFO community has been trying to get at this subject for decades. So it just feels like, you know, psychological manipulation of how we're supposed to perceive this and who we're supposed to trust and what level of information should we consider acceptable as evidence. And right now, I have not seen a level of information from these guys that I consider to be hardcore evidence of frankly, anything, you know. So I think there's a lot of confirmation bias in the UFO community. The whole "I want to believe," like that poster, "I want to believe," which is like classic. That in of itself feels like a psyop. The idea of like, no, you shouldn't want to believe, you should know. You should want to know, right? You don't want to believe. This isn't a religion.
Right.
This is a scientific exploration to understand our own reality and the wider corpus of intelligences that might exist within
We're not
it.
trying to create a reality.
We're not trying to create a reality.
We're trying to understand reality.
So the whole "I want to believe" kind of tagline for ufology in of itself feels like some weird government psyop. You know, it's not about belief. It's not about belief.
Right, right.
That being said, I don't know, the consciousness side of it can get into belief. And so, I don't know, contradict myself slightly there, but
at the end of the day, I mean, at the end of the day with the consciousness stuff, I mean, it's based on experiences that you've had. And so for you, it's a knowing as opposed to a belief, right?
But that knowing did arrive from an original belief that I was entertaining, right? Like, please come and see me. And I believed it. I didn't know it. I believed it. So I have to kind of contradict myself slightly just to say there is an element of belief, like within the weird, conscious, supernatural thing. But I'm talking more about like the actual government approved stamp. Like, I don't want to just believe, I want to know.
But you can say conclusively that that experience was real.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, as whatever real really means, but yes, like, you know.
I mean, you saw that with your eyes.
With my eyes.
You had the mark on your arm. I mean, so
tangible.
Yeah. So, I mean, it happened. You know, I mean, it was something that you experienced.
Yeah.
So,
And that's why I use that as my foundational base. It's like, well, at least I know that that's real, whatever that really means. Let's work from that point. So, you know, I'm open to a lot of stuff, but I'm not willing to just let go of my objective thinking mind and just believe something because a GS-15 government guy says it. You know, I have to know more. And,
or even try to fit your experience into some belief system.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, you don't want to do that. You don't want to like pigeonhole yourself into one thing based on your experience. You can be open to all the other possibilities for what this experience might represent.
Exactly. I have no agenda with it. So if it turned out to just be a very complex hallucination that my brain produced, I'm like, that's fascinating. We should learn more about how our brains can produce hallucinations without any sort of external stimulus. Or if it's some form of another thing that's quite an interesting idea is plasmic intelligence. So we were talking at lunch about plasma, the fact that 99% of the physical observable universe is made of plasma, and we don't discuss this in school. We're taught about solids and gases and liquids, but we don't talk about plasma. And I think there's a lot of different reasons for that. But I wonder if this might be some form of plasmic entity. And if you think about, are you familiar with the, I think it's STS-75 tether incident, where the tether broke off in space from NASA and all these orbs started apparently floating around it?
Yeah, sure.
So it was dismissed as ice crystals by, the skeptics. If you actually, there's a brilliant video that I highlighted on Joe Rogan where they've, some genius person has actually, what's the right word, attached the flight paths to each of the objects so you can see the line of where it was originally moving and where it's going. And when you, because it's a very busy screen, when you see this pole, it's a black and white video, you see this long pole, it's like multiple kilometers long, this huge electromagnetic pole that they were doing testing on, and it broke off and it's floating through space, and all these things start coming around it. And yeah, there we go. Perfect. That's the flight path one. And so this one has got the flight paths added on, which is what those lines are. And when you look at the flight paths, you see curves, you see direct stops, you see complete directional changes. And this one right here is like basically the best video to demonstrate, like, yeah, if you just have a look at some of these, you'll see them completely change. Like that one there just went completely back down again. Yeah. You do have to focus on a few, but the more you watch, the more you see. Right. And the whole point of this, the reason I'm bringing it up, is that is a huge antenna that's producing a massive amount of electromagnetic energy. The idea is that perhaps some of these are intelligences, or not even necessarily intelligences, it could be animals that are living on an energetic spectrum and subsist off of electromagnetic energy. And when you have high concentrations of electromagnetic energy, they come around it, they group around it like schools of fish. And it just made me curious about my own experiences, because we are electromagnetic beings. We produce electromagnetic energy through our heart, through our brain. And so what if you are just glowing electromagnetically, and these things are like fish, and they just swim up and they want to be around it, they want to get some energy from it. They might not be intelligent, conscious at all. It could just be a completely instinctual, animalistic, plasmic intelligence. And there's a lot to say. I mean, people can dismiss that, but scientists are really looking into the self-organizing properties of plasma and how there could be a route for intellect, a route for consciousness, intelligence to evolve and develop within that. The sun is essentially a self-organized plasma. And these things are extremely complex in the way that they actually create almost like, this is what's very weird, almost like a neural architecture in terms of how energy is transversing through a plasmic self-organized or exotic vacuum object, which is what they like to call them as well. And there's a very interesting scientist, Dr. Salvatore Pais, who is known for these patents that came out via the US Navy that are like UFO patents, hybrid aerospace underwater vehicles and, fusion reactors. And he is strongly of the belief that plasma has the ability to obtain consciousness, that it's not objectively conscious, but this self-organizing property, whether it occurs in the vacuum of space or it occurs in a lab inside of a vacuum chamber, can gain consciousness and
Seems pretty
shows
obvious.
signs. Yeah, and so like, when you get into these incredibly energetic emotional states and you have weird plasmic orb things floating down, yeah, maybe it's not intelligent aliens. Maybe you're just interacting with another element of the animal kingdom that you didn't know about,
Yeah.
Possible.
Could be former humans.
Could be former humans. Like, the door is open for so many explanations.
It could just be life itself.
Yeah.
Just floating around, and they were attracted to this.
What's funny is if you go to South America or Peru, like they're just like, yeah, of course they exist, man.
Yeah.
What are you talking about?
Right.
Yeah, the ovnis.
Right.
Yeah, they're everywhere.
Right.
They're part of the spiritual realm. They're part of reality. And it's only in our Western mind that we're just so shut off from all of this stuff that we consider it to be completely fanciful. You go to most places in the world where there's like more spiritual belief, and they're just like, of course that's real, idiot.
Right.
You
right.
know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I interviewed Avi Loeb, and gosh, man, it just couldn't. It was just such a hard no with anything that when you die, it's like a computer turning off, and that's the end of it.
He's a reductionist.
Yeah.
He's a hardline reductionist. I interviewed him, and I was a bit disappointed when he said that he doesn't believe in conspiracy theories. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? And he was like, well, conspiracy theories, I just don't believe in them. I was like, well, do you believe in the Pentagon Papers, Iran-Contra, Watergate? Like, these are all conspiracies are real. And he was like, oh, yeah, I suppose you make a good point there. I was like, Harvard scientist. Harvard.
Yeah, he's very one track. But that's kind of it. Kind of represents where science is today. For the most part. I mean, I think it's changing. It
is changing.
Young people, I think, are more open-minded, obviously.
But that's the thing as well. The old guard changes out, and the status quo begins to shift. The orthodoxy kind of disintegrates because the people that were holding it up have been replaced with people like us who are, or a lot of the Silicon Valley guys. They're all really weird dudes. They're looking at podcasts. They're checking out. They've got different ideas. So I think that generational transition could see us developing a much larger knowledge of things that were considered ridiculous and fanciful by the old school scholars and academics and scientists. That's changing. That is changing.
It's like there's clearly a difference between a dead body and a living body. You can feel the difference. There's something that's not there with the dead body. So what is that thing that's not there when the body dies? And it's like, well, it's life. Okay. Well, we are life. I am life. Well, what is that? Well, we don't know. And I think it's like okay to say, I don't know if it's light. I don't know if it's plasma. I don't know if it's an electromagnetic field that's, come together and has joined as a collective consciousness. I think it's just like, but we want to explore that and hopefully try to figure that out one day, as opposed to, no, it's just there's nothing.
Exactly.
There's nothing next, But meanwhile, every religious person in the world believes that there's something next, and that the soul that we are goes on and goes to quote unquote heaven or something. And so this isn't like a outside of the box or crazy, thought that life exists.
No,
but it's like nobody's attempting to define what life is. And so it's just one of the most mind-boggling things for me at this point in civilization as to like why we're just ignoring this topic. And I think it's just because of, it gets mixed up with beliefs, and that's when it gets touchy for people to talk about.
For sure.
So,
and admittedly, in the alternative world, there's like 1,000 ideas that you can just ignore, and then a couple of ones that are like, oh, okay, he's got a good point. So it is. I understand from whether it's science and consciousness or history, why there's animosity from within the academic institutional kind of sector towards the alternative and the pseudoscience. Like, I do understand, because there's a spaghetti junction of contradicting claims and ideas, but yours are also in that. That's the problem, is your one is also a part of that spaghetti junction, because it doesn't make very much sense. And so there are viable routes alternatively to these explanations, but it is, like you said, whether it's ufology or ancient history, swimming through just a fucking shitstorm.
I know.
You know
it's
what I mean?
too bad. Yeah.
It's very difficult to obtain actionable, real, valid information. And so when you do find, sources of that information, it's fantastic and it's rewarding.
Right.
And, I'd like to hope that I can try and be that, but I am very much of the position that, I'm just learning myself and trying to present my own education and learning. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to make assumptions that aren't correct. I'm going to be a human being. But I think that there is so much that we're not being told, and so much that we're on the cusp of realizing as well with our scientific endeavors into, again, quantum computation and getting deep into the bedrock of reality. You know, this is like one of the big things that I think is a difference between consciousness and science in that regard is that consciousness and David Lynch, is it David Lynch, the director? No, Lynch. Film director, Mulholland Drive, and
I'm not sure.
Oh, okay, I think it's David Lynch. Very great film director. He did a brilliant. Yes, okay. Yeah. He did a brilliant sketch of like transcendental meditation versus empirical science, and like kind of getting into the bedrock of reality. And it's very true that, you know, through the transcendental meditation, you just kind of dive down into the unified field and you start getting information from what you could call the Akashic records or the unified field. And the material version of that, you got to chip through the bedrock. You got to get through the protons and the neutrons and the atoms and all yeah, it's like this, like a very similar one to this, where it's got the matter on one side, the mind on the other, and how the mind just dives right down into unified field. Whereas the matter, because it is matter, you've got to go through that bedrock. So the scientists, you know, they're breaking atoms, they're splitting things, they're slowly figuring out what the meditative practitioners figured out way before them. Again, absent the empirical evidence, they don't have that. They just have the intuitive knowing and the information that they come back from these states with. And yet, hundreds and hundreds of years, if not thousands of years later, modern science slowly getting to the same position deep down in that bedrock. They crack through and they find the unified field. Everything just suddenly becomes energy. All of these material composites come from this nothingness. And that is where we're teetering on the edge right now. I think with developments in AI and quantum computation and just various accelerations in science, we will begin to get to a point perhaps where we can actually prove the afterlife exists, prove that consciousness does change from one state that's physical to a non-physical form, and it doesn't dissipate, it doesn't just melt away. And so I think that we're in a really unique opportunity and moment in human history where, you know, spirituality and science starting to connect. Project Unity, it's what I truly believed intuitively from when I first started this, and I still feel that that's where we're going. We're slowly connecting and unifying these concepts, and God, who knows what happens when you do that? Is that when the monkey becomes the flying saucer, and you know we leave this planet, we traverse the universe? I don't know, but we're right near it. I feel like we're right near it, but so much could go wrong during that period. You know, we're still very immature and volatile as a species, so it's not a surely destined trajectory for humanity. We have to make some conscious changes, I think, you know, which is very difficult. How do you make conscious changes on such a large global scale?
Right.
You know, Maharishi effect, maybe.
Yeah.
You know about that? You know, the whole idea of reducing crime and populations through meditation. It's very interesting. There's actually some legitimate statistics behind that.
Oh,
yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
And we need a bit more of that in the world.
Probably true. Well, what in terms of your social media that you have going on right now, what are your big channels? How do people kind of follow you?
So I said it to Joe, I've got like no business acumen whatsoever. So I'm just kind of like on Twitter or X and YouTube. That's it.
Yep.
YouTube, it's Project Unity. On X, it's the Project Unity, just because Project Unity was taken. Which I wonder who's the project. I'm gonna buy him out. I want that handle on X. I want my original handle, please. But yeah, just X and Twitter. Obviously, I've got a Patreon, Project Unity, a Patreon. If you want to support my channel, and you do get an invitation to a Discord channel and early access to my interviews, my documentaries, stuff like that. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell.
Should see if Project Unity X is available for X.
Yeah, that'd be good actually.
Yeah,
Project Unity X.
Yeah, I found Beall X.
Nice. That's not bad.
So it's
that's
perfect.
Not,
it's like Beall's my thing. But well, cool. Yeah. So I guess I had maybe just another question. We were super heavy on the UAP topic today, which is fantastic.
Well, it's actually refreshing for me just because I've been jumping into the history stuff so much that I think people assume I'm just a historian type of guy. It's like, no, I've got a lot of different research avenues I've gone down, so it's quite nice to kind of go back over the UFO stuff. Yeah. Although we should maybe just briefly mention the Khafre Pyramid Project and talk about those studies.
Yeah, because I got Filippo Biondi. Thank you. Yep, coming on the show in a couple of weeks, and I know he was on Rogan as you were on Rogan not too long ago. So your thoughts on that project? I guess I've just heard bits and pieces about it, and I think he's interested in me potentially helping to invest in the project and whatnot. And I guess I've heard from people that I've had on the show that they don't totally get it, and then I hear from people who I've had on the show that are like, "This is amazing,"
Right.
and it's like it's 100% legit, and Joe Rogan is freaking out about it, So it seems like everybody's like on one side of the spectrum or the other about this, and I'm totally open to this for sure. But it is a freaking big deal if it's anywhere near legit. I mean,
Completely rewriting history.
Totally.
Really.
It's so big that it's just. I haven't even really tried to dig into it because I feel like it's if this is true, it's the biggest thing in human history. It's the biggest
I
accomplishment
think that
in human
would be
history.
full-blown confirmation of a lost civilization because it's just not achievable. It's not achievable.
No.
And the depths, the pressure, the temperature, not achievable.
Right.
Even today would really struggle. So, I'm actually, last time I was in Egypt was when I was there on the Giza Plateau with Filippo Bionde. And that was his first time actually on the Giza Plateau. It's quite funny. He'd done all these scans. He'd never actually been there physically himself. He just scanned it from space. So, being there and kind of seeing his experience of it was really amazing. And also going back into the pyramids with the background knowledge that this might be underneath it was just weird. Like, you're standing in there and you're just like, it's almost like, it almost makes you sick. Like, it's like, that's just too much infrastructure. Like, that's crazy that could be below my feet. You know what I mean? But no, the scans I was lucky because I basically caught wind of this the moment it came out, just by chance. I was on YouTube, and a very, very small channel, like probably like 50 subscribers, just popped up in my recommended saying, scans over the pyramid, announcement of it, things below the pyramid. So I clicked on it, and it was someone who was like obviously known to the Khafre pyramid team who was putting something out from their preliminary conference. And so I was just like, I kind of, learned about it as much as I could, looked up Filippo Bionde. Turns out he's a real scientist who's specializing in this synthetic aperture radar and Doppler tomography, and he's got a patent, and he works for the Italian government. And what people I found very quickly, because I, again, tried to learn as much as I could before I was talking about it, and I put out a quick video saying all of this, and I think that's the one that Joe Rogan first saw and kind of put me on his radar a little bit. What a lot of people, including, so-called professionals like Flint Dibble and these guys that are supposed to know their stuff in terms of like, proving their point, they were making these really crazy generalizations and complete mischaracterizations of the technology being deployed. So, they were saying that there is no
that
radar.
Shouldn't be surprising.
But I know, but it was just like, God, like these guys are meant to be the like the professionals everyone listens to. But this is what they're really like, is they just cherry pick and they quickly find a knee-jerk reaction to kind of attack something. And so they were saying there's no radar, there's no ground penetrating radar or any sort of radar that can penetrate 800 a kilometer into the earth. This is ridiculous. And so, he was on Piers Morgan saying that and, giving it all this. And the truth of it is that they weren't ever claiming that they were penetrating 1,000 kilometers into the ground. Now, does Filippo Bionde say that they can actually find things up to, I believe he said, 6 kilometers? Yeah, that's what they're claiming. They can find things 6 kilometers below the earth. But none of it's using a penetrating radar. That's not possible through rock and through all the water. So what's actually happening, at least from my layman understanding of synthetic aperture radar Doppler tomography, is that the synthetic aperture radar is taking all of these mosaics of the Giza Plateau from space. It's doing all of these various scans. But it's the Doppler tomography element, which is the patented element of this, because SAR, synthetic aperture radar, has been around for a while. That's not Filippo's thing. The SAR Doppler tomography is Filippo's patented technique that applies the Doppler effect, which is sound, so the analyzing of sound. And what they're essentially claiming is that they are scanning subsurface levels of depth, so less than an inch underneath the sand. But what they're measuring from that is vibration that's coming up from structures below the ground. So if anything below the ground is structural, made of a stone and set up in a geometry, it will have a resonance through it that can be mapped. So obviously, like, vibration traveling through the earth is coming up and registering on the surface of the earth. It's just you don't feel that, very light vibrations. But these technologies can scan for these vibrations and then model them. And it's the modeling of vibration coming up from below the surface that, when modeled in a computational system, comes up with these spiraling columns beneath the site. and comes up with these infrastructural elements that are coming up in the SAR scan. So essentially, it's the sound, it's the vibration from structures beneath the ground registering on the surface that the satellite then scans the surface, picks up that vibration, and translates that vibration through computational systems into imagery. Right? So it's not scanning down into the earth deep down and breaking through rock. It's scanning the surface and reading and rendering vibrational information.
So if the surface is a pyramid of 2.4 million blocks, then how are they getting vibration at the surface above these structures?
So in like the
So I can see, like, if you have an empty football field and it's vibrating, and you say, okay, this football field is vibrating, and I've got this scan that's scanning the top of this, and I'm going an inch deep into the grass, and I'm seeing these vibrations, and I know that there's kilometer-long pillars underneath this football field because I can see the tops vibrating. But with a pyramid on top of the ground,
would that not cross the like produce noise? Is what you're saying?
Yeah,
like vibrational noise.
Yeah, because if the technology is picking up vibrations at the ground level, where are the vibrations coming from if the ground is covered by a pyramid?
It's a great point. It's something to ask Filippo.
Yeah.
Because again, I'm not a expert in SAR Doppler, so he might have an explanation for that.
I'm sure he does.
And again, like, you know, so a good friend of mine, Jeffrey Drum from The Land of Chem, brilliant YouTube channel. Please check out The Land of Chem. I went out to Egypt and filmed a number of episodes with him.
We did a 3-part episode on this on our podcast with Jeffrey. Yeah.
So Jeffrey, I'm good friends with Filippo and I'm good friends with Jeffrey. And I'm like, I want both of you to explain this. You know what I mean? Like, I'm very interested in the idea that this is happening, and I think there's some legitimacy to these scans. There's been so many repeating scans, I think over 200 tomography scans over 2 years, and they keep coming back with the same signatures. But then, you know, Jeffrey's pointing out that there are issues with the way that they're reading this and the, you know, comparison to the Gran Sasso laboratory, and there are discrepancies and issues. So for me, I'm sitting back and watching, especially, you know, these two talking with each other. I'm very open for, you know, debate, debunk, disprove, reprove. Like, I want to see it. But like I said, I'm not a professional. So I'm looking at it with fascinating eyes and thinking to myself, well, we've got an Italian scientist who's clearly got a very established career in the Italian government. He's no joke. He wouldn't throw this away on a whim. He wouldn't just, you know, embarrass himself in his own community of radar specialists on a whim. And so I want to trust that he has a good explanation for this, and I'm willing to listen to it. But yeah, great point. Like,
I don't know. Yeah,
geometry and, like, you know, what's going to cause noise and what's going to cause artifacts within the scans. These are all things that are very important to bring up.
Like, could the pyramid itself just be having micro vibrations because of the Earth is, you know, moving and
exactly.
You know, so.
Yeah. But this is it. We need to explore it, study it, not just attack it and try and, you know, denigrate it before they've even fully proven their case. But yeah,
and is the software public?
No, that's again another question mark. And like another question mark is the software is not public, or they haven't disclosed what the software they're using is. And there was actually a couple of guys at the Cosmic Summit that were like total nerds in this arena and knew, like, I mean that as a compliment, guys. Like, you know, they knew how to help with the computer, and they were trying to tell Filippo, and I don't think he was really listening or understanding them. So you know, you guys, like Filippo, you should link up with these guys, and please do contact him again, and I can help maybe bridge that communication gap, because like there are questions about like the software being used and how it's being done. So it's not a sure thing, that's for sure. It's not a sure thing, and we do have to question it. But I would like to imagine that someone like Filippo has given this a lot more thought than just a basic observation of a couple of scans and gone out all guns blazing on it. You know, I'd like to think that he's gone a bit deeper than that, and he seems to demonstrate that in his interviews and the way that he goes into the details of the scientific technology that he's actually applying. It seems like there is a real logic to that, and so who knows? It could be fake. It could end up not being exactly what they believe it to be. I don't think that they are in any way trying to dupe people, like, not at all. I don't think that. But who knows if they're reading it correctly? Maybe there'll be changes as we progress with this. You know?
Yeah.
I'm open to anything.
I met him at the Cosmic Summit as well, and had a great conversation with him. Yep, he sure is. Yeah, nice guy, and was excited that that he was interested in doing the podcast. And so him and Nicole
Sicolo.
Yes, she'll be on with him. She'll be here with him.
Well, that's it. You know, and you know, ask them these questions, like see what he says. See what he says,
sure.
You know?
For sure. Yeah, it'll be good to get into that and at detail, and hopefully, you know, because I'm not questioning it. I just want to understand.
Well, we should all question it. Like, you know, I want to believe it, and I think that there's some very good evidence that there's something underneath there. And obviously, you have antiquated stories about huge structures beneath the Giza Plateau labyrinths, and you know, stories from locals that say that when they went down there as kids, and they would find these, you know, huge tunnels that you could drive a semi truck through, and if you keep walking, you'd come up in Saqqara. So, you know, there are data points to suggest there's huge infrastructure below ground. This is kind of just more of a, you know, potential confirmatory signature of that claim that's going back through history. But yeah, it needs more validation, you know, in terms of the specifics of what's actually beneath the pyramids.
Yep,
you know?
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Yeah. What else? I mean, in terms of closing things out, was there anything else on your mind?
I'd love it if people check out my latest documentary. That was a lot of hard work going through Peru and documenting all these different megalithic sites. And I believe I have filmed it in the best quality that anyone has ever done in terms of 4K cinematic expedition through all of these megalithic places in Peru. And I just released my, technically they're episodes. Like, I'm just kind of doing this very loose ancient technologies thing. So I had like 3 episodes in Egypt with Jeffrey Drum. No doubt there'll be more. And then I went off to Peru, and if I go to anywhere else, I'll do more of these episodes. But this one ended up being 1 hour and 40 minutes long, so it's basically a feature-length documentary. And yeah, I'd really appreciate it if people check that out and gave me their thoughts on it. But aside from that, it's just been a real pleasure to be here with you, Matt, and to share these stories. I appreciate that you've taken me through a few different subjects, because I research quite a few different subjects, so I don't want someone to just kind of pin me down on ancient history. It's nice to go exploring all of these, you know, different areas. So thank you. It's been a real pleasure.
It's been a lot of fun. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
it was. I know we bounced around a lot, and
it was great.
You know, I didn't really, you know, give you a heads up at all about what we were going to talk about. So you're just riffing, man, and it was great. It was great. You did an incredible job. So again, thank you for flying halfway across the world to come and
Thank
visit.
You for flying me out, bro.
You're welcome. And apologies about the ghetto first class, but yeah.
No, dude, you don't understand. I'm not someone who's used to first class or business class. So whenever an economy seat is empty, I'm just like, this is the best. I'm living my life. Like the first business class experience of my life was Joe Rogan, and I was just like, oh my God, this is some VIP treatment. I'll tell you this much.
That's awesome.
And it definitely makes you feel a little sad on your next plane ride when you're just looking at that cabin, like, I know what they're up to in there. They're having cocktails, they're lying down like this,
totally,
like, you know what I mean? But no, dude, it's been a real pleasure, and thank you for getting me out here.
Awesome,
great.
Awesome. Well, I've enjoyed the chat tremendously, and
Good.
we'll
That's
do
what
it.
matters to me.
Yeah, we'll do it again sometime.
Great.
So appreciate you.
No worries, bro.
Yep. Awesome.